On May 12, 2023, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I still haven't forgiven them. Just over a year ago, I started working on a video essay about Breath of the Wild. I know, it's never been done. That video, somewhere between a retrospective and a love letter, never got made. And while it's still something I'd like to make eventually, I'm not in a rush anymore. That initial sense of urgency stemmed from a fear that Tears of the Kingdom was going to be so good that there would be no reason to play Breath of the Wild ever again after it came out. That is not what happened. And now it feels like I can't make that video, not without talking about Tears of the Kingdom first. Because my dream Breath of the Wild retrospective exists in a world without Tears of the Kingdom. When I make that video, I'm going to be pretending that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't exist. And in order to do that, I need to have already said everything I need to say about this game. And I do have a lot to say, in no small part because I love the game that it's at least ostensibly a sequel to. Since I started work on this project in earnest, more and more people have begun to come out of the woodwork to express their disappointment with Tears of the Kingdom, to the point that some people are quick to label the game's critics as bad faith, nitpicking, hating on something that's popular because it's popular, and I'll never deny that those people are out there. But I want to be very clear that the reason it's taken me over a year to make this video is not because I'm clout chasing. I spent the past year pouring hundreds of hours into this game, playing and replaying every single shrine, taking notes, talking to friends, refining my thoughts. It was all leading up to this. All of this is just to say that I hated Tears of the Kingdom before it was cool, and I hate it in a differenter and specialer way than everyone else. Before we found out the actual name of the game, Tears of the Kingdom was the sequel to Breath of the Wild, or Breath of the Wild 2. Everything the game had going for it was predicated on its status as a sequel to Breath of the Wild, but the final product felt less like a sequel and more like a second draft, to the point that it's not even clear whether the events of Breath of the Wild as we experienced them even happened. Tears of the Kingdom is at its strongest when you're not thinking about Breath of the Wild, but I'm always thinking about Breath of the Wild. It consumes my every waking moment, and I'll never be free. I saw this cafe in the Prague airport and went, woo! Anyway, this video is made with people who've played Tears of the Kingdom in mind. You're more than welcome to watch this video if you haven't played the game, and I'll be providing context where it's needed, but if you care about spoilers, consider this your warning. I also know that many of you are going to be listening to this video rather than watching it. With that in mind, when you hear this sound, it means there's text on screen or some other visual element that I feel is important. It's obviously just a suggestion, but I spent literally hundreds of hours editing this video, and it moves at such a pace that important quotes or visuals that I spent an inordinately long time working on are sometimes only on screen for a few seconds, so you can feel free to take that into consideration or not. I'm not the boss of you. Now, without further ado, let's skydive into my critique of The Legend of Zelda: Tears of Me personally.
Secret stone?
Demon King. Demon King?
Secret stone.
That voice again.
I know why I am here. It's something only I can do.
There is nothing I can say that will make you understand how badly I wanted to love this game. Breath of the Wild is hardly perfect, but it's still a game that I really love. And in the months leading up to Tears of the Kingdom's release, I spent countless hours imagining what its sequel would be like. What you need to understand is that we knew nothing going into this game. We got the 10-minute gameplay demo and a handful of trailers, but those didn't really give us a sense of what the game would actually be like. If Tears of the Kingdom was even a fraction as good as its final trailer, I would not be making this video. Even the art book that leaked didn't spoil much of anything. My only takeaways from it were that this guy is named Rauru and that there was going to be cheese! Game of the Year incoming? Just kidding. Game of the Year is a meaningless distinction, and if you care about the Game Awards, you need to get some bitch. Getting excited about new video games is very rare for me. I'm someone who typically believes that the only way to avoid disappointment with a new game is to go in with zero expectations. Being a Pokemon fan for most of your life will do that to you. But it was borderline impossible not to fantasize about Tears of the Kingdom. I wasn't one of the people who complained about the combat or the weapon durability back in the Breath of the Wild era. Honestly, neither of those things really bothered me, but I did think there needed to be expanded dungeon content, more challenging and creative shrines, better writing, and some elaboration on the many questions raised by Breath of the Wild through its environmental storytelling choices. What was the purpose of the Forgotten Temple? What was the deal with the Typhlo ruins, or the mazes, or Lanayru Promenade, or the massive Leviathan skeletons? What was the deal with the dragons, the Guardians of the Springs that happen to match up strikingly well with their counterparts from Skyward Sword? What is Malice? Is it alive? Can it think? Hopefully you didn't care too much about these questions, because Tears of the Kingdom is not interested in even acknowledging them, let alone answering them. But we'll get to that. My point is that there was a lot of cause for excitement in the lead up to Tears of the Kingdom's release, but then something very tragic happened. The game came out. Tears of the Kingdom came out during finals season. I finished up my classes and I finally got my hands on the game. I started up the game and, oh hey, it's the full version of that teaser from 2019. Cool. Zelda's being cute, her girlfriend carries her torch for her so that she can take pictures on her iPhone, Mummy Ganon wakes up. So far so good. The Master Sword explodes, Zelda falls into the abyss, much to my chagrin. Link gets grabbed by a magic hand, shit starts going crazy outside. Cut to Link waking up with a brand new arm, and we all know what happens next. I'm neither ashamed nor too proud to admit that I cried watching this intro. For all this game gets wrong, it never misses the mark when it comes to spectacle, accentuated by the game's incredible score. What's about to unfold is disappointing enough to warrant a thesis-length critique, but every time I watch this scene, I'm transported back to the first time I saw it. And that feeling, or even just the memory of that feeling, still kinda gets me. What follows is essentially just a rehash of Breath of the Wild's tutorial, but I'm not mad about it. It was decent for what it was, and the sky as a setting is beautiful. So you talk to a Ghost King, again, go to 4 shrines and get your abilities, again, and then the king disappears while urging you to go save Zelda, again. The Master Sword gets sent back in time, we see Zelda receive it in the past, and it is at this point that the game completely falls apart. In Breath of the Wild, the ghost of King Rhoam tells you that it would be a bad idea to go try and beat Ganon immediately. The player is encouraged to spend their time getting stronger, whether that's through exploring, completing the shrines, freeing the divine beasts, all of those things or none of them. You can go directly to Ganon, but there isn't a sense of urgency. If there were, there'd be a massive disconnect between Link's goal of defeating Ganon as quickly as possible and the player's goal of experiencing this massive world and all that it has to offer. I'm going to be mostly avoiding game design jargon in this video, because if you have to explain every single piece of terminology you want to use every single time you want to use it, it's not a helpful piece of terminology. Having said that, yes, I do know that there's a term for that disconnect, and yes, I do know that it's called ludonarrative dissonance, so you can stop typing. I bring this up because the quest you get at the end of Tears of the Kingdom's tutorial is Find Zelda, a significant departure from Breath of the Wild's Destroy Ganon. The fundamental problem here is that Link, the character, wants to find Zelda as soon as possible, but you, the player, want to fuck around and build cars. The pretense Tears of the Kingdom gives you for exploring Hyrule is investigating what happened to Zelda by visiting the same 4 regions you visited in Breath of the Wild, all of which are currently experiencing some sort of crisis. There isn't even a mention of defeating Ganondorf until after you've cleared the 4 main temples, and that means your only stated long-term goal for the majority of the game is to figure out where Zelda is and what happened to her, which wouldn't be an issue except for the fact that the player already knows where Zelda is. We know instantly from this scene that she's fine, she's in the past, but Link doesn't know that. As far as he's concerned, Zelda's missing. She's possibly dead. There are real stakes here, personal stakes for Link, but the player's not worried about Zelda because she's obviously fine. Look, she's right there. But okay, I hear you. Maybe you didn't realize this scene takes place in the past, and there's no guarantee that this Zelda is our Zelda. After all, Zelda gets reincarnated all the time, so it's not impossible that we're seeing her distant ancestor here or something. And even if you know she's in the past, that doesn't explain how she got there or how exactly you're meant to find her. Unfortunately, Link finding out what happened to Zelda doesn't change anything. I'm remaining vague here on purpose because we'll get into this when we discuss the story. But for now, just keep in mind that the very premise of the adventure you're about to set out on is shaky at best and completely worthless at worst. Hi there, it's me during the editing process. You may notice that my mic sounds pretty good for someone who's never made one of these here videos before. The bad news is that I figured it out hundreds of hours into the editing process, and I need to get on a plane in a few days. I'm not going to be in the country for the next month, and if I want this video to come out before that, which I do, I just need to release it as it is. But it's okay. If it's not finished, that's no big deal. You get to watch this video for free. Tears of the Kingdom wasn't finished, and that game cost $70. Right after that scene with the Master Sword, you're finally granted access to the surface of Hyrule, and the world is yours to explore. Sort of. You're still missing your paraglider, which Breath of the Wild gave you at the end of the tutorial. And given the emphasis this game places on vertical exploration, you're not actually free to explore the world until you manage to get your hands on it. So you land in the conspicuous new body of water, make a big splash, and make your way to Lookout Landing, your de facto base of operations in this game. Lookout Landing is a completely new settlement added to Tears of the Kingdom on top of what used to be the Sacred Ground ruins. And I don't have much to say about it. My first time playing this game, I didn't even realize this shelter area existed, and it didn't make any difference whatsoever. This location has the bare minimum amount of personality and identity, and talking to the people here mostly serves to fool you into thinking that the characters in this game remember who Link is. Overwhelmingly, when you meet an NPC in Tears of the Kingdom for the first time, even if you already met them in Breath of the Wild, they act like this is the first time you've ever met. And there are weird exceptions to this too. Hudson remembers you because you helped him build Tarrey Town, but in order for Hudson to have built Tarrey Town, Link needs to have bought the house from Bolson first, who doesn't remember Link. And even if a character doesn't personally remember meeting Link, are we seriously meant to believe that they don't recognize the guy who saved the entire goddamn world like within the past few years? In a world that has a newspaper? In Breath of the Wild, people were still discussing the champions 100 years later, but people don't recognize Link? Is he Tony Hawk? Even new players know that this is a sequel to Breath of the Wild, so the fear of alienating new players isn't a good enough reason to have almost everyone treat you like a stranger. But okay, you arrive at Lookout Landing, and you're immediately given the runaround. Purah gives you a recap of the events you literally just experienced that's so unnecessary it would make Persona 5 blush. Then she sends you over to Hyrule Castle to talk to a handful of other characters who really don't matter, and then you go back to Lookout Landing, at which point she activates the new Sheikah Towers and then finally hands over the glider. This whole sequence was pretty shitty and boring, but I held on to hope. I'd been looking forward to this game for 6 years, and I knew exactly where I wanted to go first. Typhlo Ruins. In Breath of the Wild, Typhlo Ruins was a location that absolutely captivated me. It was shrouded in complete darkness, filled with animal statues and architecture reminiscent of the 3 massive labyrinths, which were themselves a huge unsolved mystery. In the final Tears of the Kingdom trailer, we got a few seconds of footage showing the area with the lights on, and that was it. I knew I had to go there first. So I did. I made my way north until I arrived at the ruins, and what I found there was a Skyview Tower. No story, no secrets. There weren't even any monsters to fight, and no, the constructs don't count. Before you try to tell me that actually there is content there, in a sense you're technically correct. You can come back here after you finish the 4 main temples and do some absolutely asinine tasks to reveal like a handful of gemstones, and like what, an amiibo item from Breath of the Wild, and some exposition written on a slab? This is a far cry from something like an involved puzzle, or story section, or even a shrine. This did not do it for me, but I was still determined to find something interesting, so I headed west. It wasn't far from the ruins to the North Lomé Labyrinth, and throughout the trailers I'd seen the mazes inexplicably floating in the sky. That had to be something, right? So I made it to the labyrinth, and I was disappointed but not surprised to find that the layout of the maze hadn't changed between the 2 games. Having played Breath of the Wild to death, I quickly dropped into the maze and found the shrine immediately. Even if I hadn't, by the way, there are pine cones conveniently placed in a line throughout the maze so you don't get lost, which is kind of the whole point of a maze, but I digress. There was a terminal to activate, and when I did, I received a new quest telling me to explore the sky level of the maze. At that point, I hadn't explored the sky at all yet, so I bookmarked it in the back of my head for later and pressed onwards, but my disappointment was growing. My next stop was the Forgotten Temple. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, in Breath of the Wild, this place was super interesting. It took clear design inspiration from Skyward Sword, complete with a massive goddess statue, somewhere that you'd expect to be a site of great significance, but it's hidden away at the bottom of the game's deepest canyon. On top of that, the place was filled with guardians, and the Breath of the Wild art book Creating a Champion confirmed that the royal family of Hyrule had placed them there intentionally. So what were they there for? What were the guardians guarding? It was one of many areas in Breath of the Wild that was disappointing because there was nothing there, but that still presented some interesting questions for the sequel to answer. I arrived at the temple and, as I had anticipated, the Guardians had been cleared out, along with the rest of the Sheikah tech in the world. In its place, though, was nothing. Maybe there was a handful of low-level monsters sitting around a campfire, or like a Korok, but certainly nothing that even came close to filling up the massive, now empty rooms. But then I found the giant goddess statue toppled over, and behind her I saw a door door leading to a new area. Beyond it was an altar with these pedestals surrounding it. My heart was racing. Was this place going to be the site of some sort of epic story moment later in the game? Were they going to make the Forgotten Temple into an actual dungeon? No. This room exists solely to show you where to find the memory cutscenes. I didn't realize there was nothing here at the time though, so I took what I thought was a W and decided to take on one of the dungeons. It's gonna be a while before we talk about the dungeons in detail, but suffice it to say, I was not impressed.
I remember hearing during the build-up to this game that Tears of the Kingdom brings Zelda dungeons back, and I'd like to find whoever started that rumor so I can punch them in the gut for lying.
I was beginning to feel nervous. The Great Sky Island had been a fun take on the Breath of the Wild gameplay formula, but if this is what the rest of the game was going to be like, I might be in for a rough time. I made my way over to the Hebra Sky Maze that wasn't too far away from the Wind Temple. I interacted with the terminal, the giant door slid open with some vague words about a test of wisdom, but the thing that got my attention was the mention of the Ruler of Owls. What was that? Was I finally going to discover something of substance? I was disappointed to discover that the only thing you actually do in the Sky Maze is glide around and activate some terminals, all of which are already marked on your map. So not only was the maze on the ground a total letdown, the maze in the sky wasn't much better either. At the end of the Sky Maze, the chasm leading below ground opened up, and I was instructed to skydive from up high to down below as a test of courage. On my most recent playthrough, my friend was watching me play this part, and she made a great observation. From Link's perspective, skydiving from such a height would probably be terrifying, but the player does this all the time, so it doesn't actually feel like a test of courage. So I skydived down and arrived in a third version of the labyrinth, this one located in the game's hellish underworld, the Depths. It was there that I found a recycled mini-boss from the tutorial island. Yay! Once I defeated it, I was able to activate yet another terminal and was told I'd be granted a rare piece of armor, cloaked in otherworldly evil. The pedestal with the treasure chest rose up from the ground. I went to open it, and... Are you kidding me? This can't be serious. They cannot be serious. The payoff to all of this is recycled DLC armor from Breath of the Wild? I could forgive the underwhelming ground maze. I could forgive the underwhelming sky maze. I could even forgive the recycled boss fight. But this? This is my reward? Armor that you can't even upgrade? If they were gonna recycle armor from Breath of the Wild, which is already lazy on the face of it, why not the Barbarian armor? That would have made sense. You got the Barbarian armor from the mazes in Breath of the Wild. Phantom fucking Ganon from Ocarina of Time? What does this have to do with this maze, with the Ruler of Owls, with anything? Worst of all, this was just one piece of an armor set, meaning the other two mazes would reward me with the other two pieces. I cannot possibly overstate how disappointed I was by this. This moment radicalized me. I knew in that moment that this game was the worst case scenario for a sequel to Breath of the Wild. And as you can probably tell by the length of this video, I mean that in just about every way imaginable. From here on out, I'm going to be breaking down all of my issues with Tears of the Kingdom in the hopes of finally getting some closure with this game. They aren't making DLC for it apparently, so hopefully once this video is out, I'll have all of this out of my system, I won't have to think about the game ever again, and I can go back to playing Breath of the Wild in peace. Okay, I lied a little. Before I can start ripping into this game, I need to address something. In the minute-to-minute experience, yes, Tears of the Kingdom can be a fun game. It's fun to run around and build silly contraptions. It's fun to fly around on the Zonai plains. It's fun to walk around on the dragons. In fact, here's a handful of other things I liked about this game, just to head this off at the pass. The music is obviously great. Kataoka does a fantastic job, and I think it's always awesome to see a woman at the helm of a AAA video game soundtrack. Being able to throw items is great. It's one of the vanishingly few things I really miss when I go back to playing Breath of the Wild. Similarly, the ability to freely move and especially rotate objects you pick up with Ultra Hand is just flat out better than how they handled Magnesis in Breath of the Wild. Another improvement is the ability to instantly swap out an item when you open a chest and your inventory is full. I like that you can upgrade horses even if there's never a reason to ride them. More on this in a minute. I like that you can view the pictures you've taken in full screen. The descriptions for the various recipes are silly, and they added fucked up and evil food, which is objectively hilarious. I love the way ice interacts with lava and water. It makes perfect sense that the mechanic works this way, and it feels very Zelda. I think the dragon armor sets are super cute, even if their set effects and bonuses are trash. I like the areas with low gravity. It's a small change, but it does a lot to shake up game feel. I wish they used it more and in more interesting ways. I love the constructs. They're super cute and have a surprising amount of personality. Skydiving is executed pretty much perfectly. It's exhilarating and satisfying, even if I'll argue in a few minutes it pretty much ruins the world design, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Proving Grounds shrines are great, especially compared to the resource-wasting snooze fest Test of Strength shrines from Breath of the Wild. Speaking of shrines, the shrine names come from real-life places in Kyoto with their names scrambled. Check out this map! I think that's sick. I love the final boss and the ending sequence, even if I don't feel like it's earned in context. I like that Raru's a goat dude and he's got goat mannerisms. I love the shot composition in the cutscenes. I love the costume and character design. Hey, did I mention that this game's pretty? Like, really fucking pretty? In a win for gay people everywhere, Zelda is taller than Link in this game. If you do this, you can pick a whole bunch of apples really fast. My point in going through this list is just to say that I don't think the game is all bad, and it's lazy to write off my criticism by saying, oh, well, it's just not for you. I really wanted to love this game. I've loved the Zelda series for as long as I can remember, and despite my issues with it, I love Breath of the Wild. The issue with Tears of the Kingdom is not that it's not for me, because Breath of the Wild was very much for me, and Tears of the Kingdom is just that game again. No, the issue with Tears of the Kingdom is that the game does not justify its own existence. This is a sequel to Breath of the Wild, a separate video game that took 6 years to make, and costs $70, the most expensive Switch game to date. The good things about Tears of the Kingdom are, in fact, good, but are they 6 years good? Are they $70 good? Keep these questions in mind as you watch this video. If you love Tears of the Kingdom, great! I love My Sims Party. Enjoying a video game does not make the video game good. I'm not trying to take your love of the game away from you, and while I'm definitely a hater, I'm not just a hater. If I didn't care about this series, I would not be making this video. Long disclaimer out of the way, let's get this show properly on the road. There is a non-zero percentage of you that are watching this video without having played Tears of the Kingdom. I'll take this opportunity to explain what Link's main abilities are in this game, which will also give me a chance to talk about some of the problems with them. Ultra Hand is the signature ability of the game. It allows you to pick objects up, rotate them, and stick them together. This is what lets you build stuff. It's a cool idea. Being able to manipulate almost any item in the world gives you a ton of flexibility, but as we'll discuss, this game doesn't really do anything interesting with it. It's also super janky. Nerl said it best when he said that for every 10 seconds of doing cool shit, there's 10 minutes of trying to get a wheel to stick in the right place. Fuse is the ability you will likely use most throughout the game, as it allows you to attach monster parts, materials, and even bits of the environment to your weapons and arrows, making them more powerful and also more durable. This only works to a point. Fusing something to your weapon doesn't repair it or anything, it just adds some attack power to it and maybe a few more swings if you're lucky. Also, despite its widespread use in combat and just general play, you almost never use it to solve puzzles. Needing to use Fuse to make a fire arrow does not mean it's a puzzle that uses Fuse, it's just a puzzle that uses a fire arrow with extra steps, and I do mean extra steps. Ascend is pretty simple. If you're standing under a ceiling or overhang, you can jump up and swim through it. This totally changes how you think about enclosed spaces like buildings or caves, and it's a mechanic I'm actually pretty fond of for the most part. Far too often the game will cut to this stock animation of Link swimming through the void in order to have enough time to render the world on the other side, and it does this even when it really shouldn't need to the point where it becomes pretty distracting. The ability also isn't super consistent. Sometimes you'll be able to ascend through a ceiling, but only while standing in a seemingly pixel-perfect position, which leads to a lot of fiddling around with Link to get him in just the right spot. Other than that, though, I don't have any big issues with it, and I think it's pretty neat. Recall allows you to reverse an object's movement in time. You can use this to return projectiles to sender, ride those falling rocks up into the sky, solve puzzles, rescue something you accidentally dropped into the abyss, and that's about it really. Wait, how could I forget the most important use of Recall, making gears spin backwards. This is so cool, I'm so glad they had me do this over and over and over and over again. Recall is incredibly powerful, but also criminally underutilized, and a lot of the puzzles in this game are seemingly set up without taking Recall into account. It's very easy to use Ultra Hand to move a platform up for a second, then lower it back down, climb on, and use Recall on it. You can use this to skip all sorts of puzzles, which I've seen a good number of people praise actually. But I maintain that if you peel all the stickers off a Rubik's Cube and stick them back on so the cube looks completed, you didn't solve the Rubik's Cube. The last ability is the only one you don't get as part of the tutorial. It's called Auto Build, and it allows you to save things you've built to a submenu and easily recreate them. This is a very solid idea with some absolutely awful implementation, something we'll talk about in the next section. When you're building with Auto Build, Link can pick up and use items in his immediate vicinity. If you're building something that calls for an item or material that isn't right there in front of you, you can use Zonite, one of the game's currencies, to generate the needed materials from scratch. These materials you purchase with Zonite are colored a solid green and can't be moved or adjusted once they're placed. They'll just disappear if you try. You can also only save 8 builds to your favorite section, which is really not that many. It would have been nice to be able to upgrade your capacity for custom schematics, especially in a game that everyone seems to insist is about creativity. Also, for obvious reasons, you can't use auto-build in shrines. I think this is a decent batch of abilities with some major sticking points. Apparently this game was finished a year before it was released, and they spent the final year on just polish. And I honestly find that hard to believe, because this game shipped with a user interface and control scheme so unpolished that I genuinely can't believe people playtested this and then allowed it to be released in this state. Spoiler alert, that's what the next section's about. Breath of the Wild was designed with the Wii U in mind. This is the necessary starting point for any discussion of the user interface in these games, because the Wii U's main gimmick was the gamepad. This thing is like the result of illicit breeding between a Wii Classic controller and an iPad. It was an absolute nightmare to develop games for, but honestly, when it worked, it really worked. The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess remakes on the Wii U integrated the gamepad for real-time inventory management, and if Breath of the Wild hadn't had its gamepad features nuked from orbit, the Wii U version of the game would probably outclass the Switch version, which is probably why they made that choice. Tears of the Kingdom's user interface is just an updated version of the Breath of the Wild user interface, which was already outdated when the game released on the Switch in 2017. Rather than overhauling it for the new game, they left most of the menuing unchanged, and in some cases they made it worse. Quick selecting weapons and items was quick and snappy in Breath of the Wild, but there's a brief pause before the menu comes up in Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm not sure why. In Breath of the Wild, you could also use the L, R, ZL, and ZR buttons to scroll through the quick menu, and for some reason they took that out for Tears, which makes no sense considering the amount of scrolling you'll be doing in this game. Which brings me back to fuse. First of all, there's no way to set types of arrows like in previous Zelda games, or even like in Breath of the Wild, which means you'll be making every single fire arrow, bomb arrow, whatever, every single time you want to use one. Your list of items is just a single continuous hotbar of everything you've ever collected, and there's no way to fuse stuff from the menu. In order to fuse something to your weapon or shield, you need to take out the item you want to fuse, drop it on the ground, switch to the weapon or shield you want to fuse to if you're not already holding it, activate fuse, and then press the weapon or shield button every single time. This is especially bad during combat because fusing mid-battle is extremely clunky, especially since there will almost always be monster parts or weapons or plants lying around that you can end up fusing to your weapons by accident. I don't understand how this is considered acceptable. Link can eat hundreds of apples and an entire raw chicken in the menu, but he can't fuse his weapons there? This system discourages players from experimenting with fuse because of how much scrolling you'll have to do to find new items to use. With over 250 material types in this game, this is in no way a sustainable system, especially without some sort of favorites tab to pin specific items for easy access. Auto build is possibly even worse. Like I said, you can use auto build to reassemble builds you've made, using either Zonite or the materials lying around in the overworld. The thing is, Link can carry Zonite devices and materials in his inventory, but there's no way to have auto build use those resources. You can't even open the menu to take them out while auto build is active. You need to stop, cancel auto build, take out the items you need, drop them on the ground, God help you if you're on a slope, reactivate auto build, and then assemble your contraption. There's also no way to put devices back into your inventory once you've taken them out, so if you miscount how many devices you need for a build, the extra ones will just go to waste. This also feels like nobody playtested it. It may seem like a small thing, but every aggravating design choice works to harm the overall experience. For example, and this isn't related to Link's powers, but I do need to talk about it because it drives me crazy, visiting stables in this game allows you to accrue pony points in order to get rewards. This is a cool system, but the stable guy won't just give the rewards to you. He tells you there's a reward available, then you need to walk around to the side counter and watch him take his sweet time moseying on over to talk to you again, and like, why do this? It's the same guy. Just give me the reward. You already have it. You're going to give it to me. Why are you doing this? Why are you like this, Tears of the Kingdom? Why do you hate me? Then there's the stuff that was annoying in Breath of the Wild and didn't get fixed in this game. The scope and the camera, for example, are still separate features when they should really have been integrated back in 2017. You also can't mute the shrine sensor without turning it off, so you either have to deal with the obnoxious beeping or not use it at all. The controls are still clunky, with the run and jump button across from each other on the button layout. I actually play both Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild with the A and B buttons reversed, and it makes a huge difference to be able to easily do a running jump, or to effortlessly take out and put away the glider. It makes more intuitive sense to have the button that takes out and swings the weapon be across from the button that puts it away, while the button that parries is next to the button that attacks. But there's still no way to dodge without locking the camera behind Link, a design choice that's 4 years older than I am. It's still way too easy to accidentally push the left analog stick too hard while running or fighting and have Link crouch, rendering him slow, vulnerable to attack, and unable to dodge. The Blood Moon cutscene is skippable, but only if you press X and then plus, information that's never properly conveyed. Great Fairies still make you sit through their endless flavor texts, still tell you about set bonuses for the 100th time, and there's still no way to see what materials you need to upgrade your armor without going to visit a fairy fountain. Tears of the Kingdom also lets you upgrade your horses, which is a cool idea except for the fact that it's got the same problem as the armor system. If you want to see how many cooked meals you'll need to give to Melania for him to upgrade your horses, you have to go talk to him. And then there's the sages. In case you haven't played the game, please understand that the A button, the one used to interact with everything in the game, also activates all 5 of your sage abilities as long as they're standing next to you. If a whole bunch of materials are lying on the ground and you're mashing the A button to pick them all up, it's not at all uncommon for Tulin to blow them off a sky island and into the abyss, or for Yunobo to light them on fire. This is equally bad in combat, where the sages are never where you need them to be when you need them to be there. It's very easy to hop on Mineru's back by accident, and then, since Link adopts Mineru's hitbox while he's riding her for some reason, you get hit. Also, for every other animal or vehicle that Link can ride in this game, pressing the X button will make him jump into the air and dismount. When you're riding Mineru, though, pressing the X button will activate her fuse ability. You have to press B and then either A or X to get off of her. This X to dismount muscle memory has been built up since 2017, and I end up coming up against it every single time I use Mineru. I don't have much footage of this, not because it doesn't happen, but because it's so annoying that I just never use the sages. It doesn't help that they take up a ton of space on the screen, and every time you climb or glide there's a distracting flash as they return to your hand. If they're all out in combat, you'll end up running around chasing the specific one you want to use, when that's time better spent just attacking the enemy directly. The sages are not strong enough or convenient enough to justify having them out, besides Tulin, but even then he's often more trouble than he's worth. He'll often attack enemies and get their attention when I'd rather just sneak past them. And that can be true of all of the sages, but Tulin's especially bad because he's got a ranged weapon. There's no easy way to summon or dismiss the sages either. You have to open the menu and then manually activate or deactivate them, then close the menu. This is the same Iron Boots bullshit that everyone hated in Ocarina of Time. It sucked then, and it sucks now. The only real improvement is the aforementioned ability to quickly swap new items from chests when your inventory's full. But given all of the things they didn't change, and all the new frustrating things they added, it's hardly enough for me to consider the UI and UX of Tears of the Kingdom up to Breath of the Wild standard, let alone better than it. But enough of this talk of UI and UX, let's get into the real conversation here. Let's start by talking about the open world. What changed, what didn't, and what probably should have. When it was confirmed early in Tears of the Kingdom's development that they were reusing the map from Breath of the Wild, I was actually excited about it. One of my biggest issues with the story presentation in Breath of the Wild was the wealth of locations that had some sort of story that was implied but never explored, never developed. I mentioned a few of these already, like the mazes and the Forgotten Temple, but it's important to note that these points of interest were everywhere. There was untapped story potential around every corner. I wasn't worried about them recycling the world because I saw Breath of the Wild's Hyrule as fertile ground for this new story to grow out of. In Breath of the Wild, I rarely felt like my exploration was rewarded. At best, I'd find another shrine or a Korok seed, but that's at best. The joy was really in the journey. I loved combing through forests for ingredients, traversing the desert, climbing through the mountains, exploring the tropical regions. All of this served as intrinsic motivation to me when I played Breath of the Wild. Even if the extrinsic rewards weren't always, rewarding. Tears of the Kingdom fares even worse than Breath of the Wild in this sense because at least Breath of the Wild was a new world with new content. I understand the appeal of using that world as a sandbox to build silly cars in, but that's Breath of the Wild nuts and bolts, not a mainline Zelda game. Breath of the Wild managed to get away with a lackluster reward structure because the joy was in the journey. But that's an excuse from 6 years ago. It doesn't hold up now, and you're not doing nearly as much journeying in this game anyway. To explain what I mean by this, let's talk about how you get around in these games. A lot of ink has been spilled about the triangle design in Breath of the Wild. That is, the relationship between walking, climbing, and gliding. The introduction of the paraglider meant that even if you climbed up a mountain and didn't find anything at the top, you still had the ability to survey your surroundings from that new vantage point, and then you could glide down to your next point of interest. For a good chunk of that game, the main method of gaining height was climbing, which was slow, but the time you saved by gliding down to your destination versus walking tended to balance it out. That's also why Revali's Gale was so satisfying to unlock, and also why it could be so game-breaking. Even Revali's Gale had its limits though. You could only use it 3 times before you had to wait out a cooldown, and a single usage of it was powerful for sure, but it wouldn't eliminate the need for climbing altogether, especially when faced with taller cliffs or mountains. While you could wait 6 minutes in the middle of a climb up a cliff for the ability to recharge, that's almost always slower than just climbing up the rest of the way yourself. Movement in Zelda games, with a few exceptions like the Zora swimming in the original version of Majora's Mask, has never been particularly fast, and I think slowing the player down and forcing them to walk places, while occasionally tedious, does force them to familiarize themselves with their surroundings. And I'm saying this because Tears of the Kingdom, well... You might not initially realize how big of a deal this is. I'm not really sure what I can say to properly express the ramifications of the ability to launch Link a million miles into the sky, so let's try this. Tears of the Kingdom introduced these little coordinates in the bottom right corner of the screen, including one number representing Link's elevation at any given moment. The highest point on Breath of the Wild's map was the peak of Death Mountain. Standing at that spot in Tears of the Kingdom gives a readout of about 900 units, so Breath of the Wild's map maxes out at a height of 900. Now, let's see what happens when we launch Link out of the Lookout Landing Skyview Tower, the base of which, for reference, is at an elevation of 25. 1,168 units. With the press of a single button, you're sent flying up higher than the highest point on Breath of the Wild's map. This isn't an outlier either, by the way. I found out while doing research for this video that the towers actually launch Link to different heights. There are 15 Skyview towers around the map, and only one of them has a launch height that maxes out below that 900 unit maximum from Breath of the Wild. And I suspect that this tower being comparatively weaker than the rest has to do with its proximity to the Wind Temple. If it launched Link as high as the others do, it would invalidate most of the Rising Island chain, one of the most widely praised portions of the game and something we'll talk about more when we discuss the dungeons. This world was simply not designed with this amount of vertical mobility in mind, and it shows. It's not just the launch that's the issue, though. It would be problematic enough on its own, but there's another element of this game that takes this from damaging to utterly disastrous. Zonai wings lose altitude incredibly slowly, can be deployed mid-flight, are easy to stockpile, don't consume battery, don't consume stamina, and allow you to cross large distances at unprecedented speed. Their only limitation is that they disappear after 30 seconds, but there's nothing to so much as disincentivize, let alone prevent a player from just pulling out a new one as soon as the old one disappears. If you're trying to get somewhere in this game, there is no reason to walk, run, climb, ride a horse, build a car, engage with the terrain between you and your destination in any way. You have 15 Skyview towers and 32 shrines in the sky, any of which can be warped to at any time, and then it'll be orders of magnitude faster and easier than any other method to skydive down to your destination. Doing anything else is suboptimal, and even if you make the conscious choice to not engage with this mechanic, you'll be doing so with the knowledge that you could be getting where you're going faster. It's a weird perspective trick where the world feels like a chore to traverse when you're on the ground, and mindlessly easy to navigate when you're in the sky. Either way, the surface in this game does not compel you to explore it, and I think that's why it's got so little going on. Why put your resources into filling out this recycled world with new, unique content when most players will just fly over it? As I was editing this part of the video, I realized that almost all of my footage of Link's traversal options came from the first few hours of my playthrough, which I think strengthens the idea that you're unlikely to explore on foot once you don't have to. I also realized that I didn't make it clear just how good it feels to ride around on the wings. The sky is beautiful, the sound design is on point, and peering over what feels like a miniature diorama of Hyrule is delightful. I'm not saying it's not fun. I'm saying it hurts the overall design precisely because it's by far the most fun way to get around the world, and that the introduction of equally fun ways to move around on the ground would have been a good counterbalance to the overwhelming appeal of air travel. Breath of the Wild was all about its world and its nature and exploring the wild that's right there in the name, but Tears of the Kingdom's design philosophy is incompatible with this world. It would be inaccurate to say that they didn't at least try to make the surface world interesting, though. They added caves to the surface world, 143 of them. And if you've been wondering when I was going to mention the caves, the answer is right now. Unfortunately, though, I don't have much to say about them. For the most part, you wander around, smash some rocks, maybe fight an enemy or two, break some more rocks, pick up a mushroom or fish, maybe there's a shrine if you're lucky, you shoot a bubble frog, and you leave. All of the clips I've just shown on screen while talking have been in different caves, but I'd forgive anyone who didn't notice because almost all of them look the same. There are a few exceptions. Some caves are wet, some are full of lava, this one's dark, this one's icy. But these exceptions represent a vanishingly small portion of the, and I cannot stress this enough, 143 caves in the game. Add the 4 caves on the Great Sky Island, and that's a total of 147 caves. And unless you're going for 100%, you will never explore all of them, because why would you? The only unique reward you're guaranteed to find in a cave is a bubble frog, a monster that, when defeated, drops an item that you can give to this guy, Colton, in exchange for some unique, if underwhelming, rewards. The problem is that 30 shrines and 3 towers require you to enter a cave at some point, and if you're collecting all the armor, you'll visit an additional 34 caves. Assuming you get the bubble frog in each of them, you will already have enough bubble gems to get all of the Colton rewards, and you'll still have 80 caves left over. More than half of all the caves in this game are basically worthless, but unless you're using a guide, you won't know which ones are worth your time to explore. When I first ran the numbers on this to try to figure out how many caves had worthwhile content in them, my takeaway was that it was lazy to leave so many of them basically empty. But I actually think it's more sinister than that. This is a video about Zelda, and not a video about behavioral science, so I'll explain this as simply and quickly as I can. I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea of reinforcement, that rewarding a behavior causes that behavior to increase in its frequency. The issue with rewards is that eventually our brains get used to them. Rats, for example, will initially be super excited about a lever that dispenses food, but eventually they'll get bored and stop pulling it. If they're faced with a lever that only sometimes dispenses food, though, they'll become obsessed with it, pulling it over and over to the point of neglecting their other bodily functions and needs. This is the power of intermittent reinforcement. It's why people get addicted to slots or gacha games or checking their phone, or why they stay in unhealthy relationships long after the other person has stopped treating them well. And that is why more than half of the caves in Tears of the Kingdom are empty. This is part of why I don't blame anyone who liked Tears of the Kingdom. It was designed as junk food for your brain, meant to keep you hooked for as long as possible. It's the mobile gamification of Zelda, and mobile games are extremely popular, not to mention addictive, especially for people with dysregulated reward centers in their brains, people with depression or ADHD, for example. And if playing Tears of the Kingdom makes you less miserable, then it doesn't actually matter if it's a good game or not. Anything that gives you joy is valuable for doing that, but that doesn't mean it's above criticism. I'll be the first to tell you that Oreos and salt and vinegar potato chips are fucking delicious, but if I only ate those, I would be very sick very quickly. Palatability is not necessarily an indicator of quality. You can like something and still demand better. Just to cover all my bases, let's very briefly touch on the wells. There are wells in this game. That's it. You can go in them, there is a reward for finding all of them, but by and large, they're even more empty and worthless than the caves are. While we're still discussing the surface world and traversal, let's talk about water. A lot of people, myself included, were hoping we'd get underwater exploration in this game, something along the lines of Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, or Majora's Mask. This hope was not realized, and Tears of the Kingdom has the same sluggish, miserable swimming that Breath of the Wild did. Credit where credit is due, though. The ability to make a little boat out of almost anything makes exploring the surface of the water a breeze. And it's something I appreciate whenever I need to get somewhere and there's a body of water in the way. Of course, this has the same issue as every other obstacle in that you can just fly over it, but building a little boat is just fun. The steering stick gives you better control than what you had with the rafts in Breath of the Wild. They're faster. It's good stuff. Looking at all of these traversal options, though, I can't help but wonder why stamina is in this game at all. You can bypass it in so many ways, whether it's by landing on a hoverstone, taking out a wing, using food, or even with a fourth example that I can't think of. In Breath of the Wild, stamina was a meaningful restriction because you needed it constantly while moving around the world. It dictated which mountains you could climb, how long you could sprint for, how long you could glide for, and a fourth example that I can't think of. In Tears of the Kingdom, you have the ability to build, which bypasses all of the restrictions that the stamina system theoretically puts on Link's movement. Removing stamina from Tears of the Kingdom, then, could have gone a long way towards making traversing the surface on foot a viable option. If you could sprint for as long as you wanted, jump up cliff sides with ease, or could swim dash infinitely, ground exploration might cease to be prohibitively tedious. In lieu of stamina containers, the player could upgrade their battery at the goddess statues, which would serve the dual purpose of preserving a sense of progression and would be a vast improvement over the current method of upgrading your battery, which, as it stands, is a painful, grindy slog. Finally, I want to talk about what's changed on the surface since Breath of the Wild, or rather, what hasn't. It's not clear how much time has passed between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but it's been at least 6 years, or however old this child is supposed to be. I understand that 6-ish years is not a lot of time for the characters to rebuild their kingdom, but so little has changed that you're bound to be disappointed no matter where you go. More signs of development, like an active effort to rebuild Castletown or some of the other ruined villages in Breath of the Wild, would have gone a tremendously long way towards making this world feel like it's actually healing. The fact that you can't help build new homes for people in a game that's about building stuff is cuckoo bananas. It's crazy. The only time you do anything even remotely similar to that is in Lurelin Village. But here you're not constructing new homes as part of an effort to recover from the calamity, you're helping repair houses that were damaged by pirates. You're just restoring the village to how it was in Breath of the Wild. So aside from Lookout Landing, there's nothing new here. I have some other issues with the surface world that have more to do with the shrines, characters, and side quests, but those are best saved for their respective sections. In the meantime, there's something else we need to talk about. Let me ask you something. What would have happened if Ganondorf hadn't gloomed Link's arm off? I'll tell you what, Hyrule would be fucked! Link wakes up in the sky with Raru's arm transplanted onto his body to replace the one damaged by Ganondorf. In the very next room, he interacts with this terminal with this handprint on it, which opens this door. Then he opens this treasure chest and later activates this construct using the same mechanism. This handprint symbol is everywhere. It's on all Zonai treasure chests, it's outside and inside all the shrines, it opens the Temple of Time, this one, not that one, it activates all of the light roots in the depths, it activates constructs, the temples, the doors in the mazes, a bunch of one-off sky islands, and for some truly inscrutable reason, there's one in the ancient Zora waterworks. This, to me, is one of the most salient examples of Tears of the Kingdom not giving a shit about making its game world immersive or believable. Without getting into the story for now, I'll just say that Rauru has no way of knowing that Link will end up with his arm in the future. Zelda doesn't even know for sure that Link survived the encounter with Ganondorf until after Rauru sacrifices himself to steal him away. Rauru says,
"Your arm, however, was beyond saving. I had to replace it, lest the injury endanger you further."
He doesn't say,
I replaced your damaged arm with my arm, an absolutely essential step in order to let you activate all the weird biometric bullshit haphazardly strewn around this world.
And it does seem to be a biometric thing. Toro complains that he can't open a Zonai chest. The author of these journals talks about not being able to activate this terminal. And we see Koga trying and failing to activate this construct in the abandoned Lanayru mine. But Link activates it no problem, and when he does, the construct says Authorizer Verified. So there is some sort of verification system, and if Rauru added Link to that system at some point, we certainly didn't hear about it. If Link hadn't gotten his arm taken off, he would have woken up on the Great Sky Island, walked into that room, tried to activate that terminal, failed, starved to death, and the game would be over. In contrast, Breath of the Wild has you use the Sheikah Slate to interface with the shrines, towers, and divine beasts. In that game, it made sense, because all of the technology was made by the same group of people, and all of it was made with the future in mind. The Sheikah Shrines were created to test a hero in the future and prepare them for a confrontation with Ganon. The divine beasts were created as weapons to fight the Calamity. You can argue that this is contrived, but at least it's internally consistent. The Sheikah tech was also deliberately placed, and it felt like part of the world. This shrine in Rito Village has its own dedicated platform, this one in Zora's Domain has its own little room, and this shrine looks out over Kakariko Village. There's a little ring of trees planted around this shrine in the Tabantha snowfield, and I know you remember Magda planting her flowers around this shrine because the internet turned that character beat into the least funny meme possibly ever. In all of these examples, though, the shrines feel like shrines. places that people visit that are part of their lives in some way. People would rightfully be upset if Tears of the Kingdom recycled the shrine placements from Breath of the Wild, but these locations just feel empty now. And the new shrines don't feel nearly as thoughtfully placed. Fucking Shrine Island doesn't have a shrine on it. No shrine on Shrine Island, and this game costs $70. I'm going through all these examples to illustrate the difference between a world inside a video game and a video game world. Keep this distinction in mind as we move forward, because this video game world issue rears its head throughout Tears of the Kingdom, from start to finish, and it's one of the many ways in which this game fails to successfully act as a follow-up to Breath of the Wild. My ex-girlfriend and I briefly got back together on May 12th, 2023, and I'm sure she'd be delighted to know that that relationship was only the second worst sequel to come out that day. More than in any other respect, Tears of the Kingdom utterly, spectacularly fails specifically as a sequel to Breath of the Wild. The story of Breath of the Wild has so little bearing on Tears of the Kingdom that you could be forgiven for thinking the events of the game didn't even happen and that Tears of the Kingdom is some sort of reboot. But that doesn't seem to be the case. In case you didn't play Breath of the Wild, or in case you need a refresher, here's a brief summary of the events of that game's story. The Kingdom of Hyrule exists in a state of cyclical conflict with Ganon, a demonic entity that reincarnates over and over again throughout the series. Breath of the Wild takes place so far in the future, after so many cycles of being defeated and reborn, Ganon has lost his physical form, reduced to basically just this cloud of pure evil. 10,000 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, an ancient tribe called the Sheikah was prospering. They were highly technologically advanced and used this technological know-how to construct an army of autonomous robots called Guardians, and 4 colossal animal robots called the Divine Beasts. These machines were created so that, when Ganon inevitably returned, he could be swiftly defeated. 4 warriors from the various peoples of the land were chosen to pilot the Divine Beasts, and 1 hero wielded the Master Sword, a sword blessed with the power to repel evil that's been a staple in the series since A Link to the Past. The 5 of them were known as the Champions, and they all worked together with the Zelda of that era, who is also always getting reincarnated, in order to counteract Ganon's evil power. Ganon wakes up, and the Champions and Zelda completely kick his ass. Fearing the destructive capability of the Sheikah tech, it was buried underground in the aftermath of the battle until 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild. In anticipation of Ganon's return, the King of Hyrule, Zelda's father, ordered that the Sheikah tech be dug up and brought back online to assist in his defeat like they had in the past. He promotes 4 new champions to pilot the Divine Beasts, and orders Zelda to start working on that sealing power of hers like ASAP. Zelda's a huge nerd who sucks at praying, and is convinced she'll be more useful working on the Sheikah tech than she will trying to awaken her powers. Unfortunately, her father, the king, was a royal asshole and refused to listen to her. He told her to stop fucking around with the robots and go back to praying. Link, who was chosen to wield the Master Sword, was instructed to accompany Zelda everywhere, both to protect her and to ensure she was making progress towards her goal. Zelda initially resented Link both for the way he was so effortlessly able to slip right into his role as the hero, and for seemingly acting as a second pair of eyes for her father. Eventually, though, she came to understand that Link didn't have any more of a say in his destiny than she did in hers, and that understanding brought them closer together. Despite Zelda warming up to Link, she couldn't get her powers to awaken, and eventually it was too late. Ganon returned, and the champions prepared for battle, only for Ganon to seize control of all of the Sheikah tech and turn them against the inhabitants of the kingdom. This event, known as the Great Calamity, was apocalyptic in its scale and wiped Central Hyrule out in its entirety. Zelda, distraught by her failure and the loss of her family and friends, is spurred to action when Link, the only person she has left, is about to die protecting her. In that moment, she's finally able to steal Ganon away temporarily, while Link is brought to the Shrine of Resurrection to recover. 100 years later, it's time for Breath of the Wild. Link wakes up in the soup, meets the ghost of Zelda's dad, and sets out on his epic adventure to take back the Divine Beasts and rescue Zelda, who, for her part, has spent the last 100 years making sure Ganon stays trapped in the castle. Link does some shrines, frees some of the Divine Beasts, storms Hyrule Castle, beats the shit out of Calamity Ganon, Zelda pops out, and the credits roll. This story is not super complicated. I explained it in 3 minutes? And I think it's important that we're all on the same page about the events of the first game, so that we're able to understand what went so wrong with the sequel. Zelda mentions the Calamity almost immediately upon booting up Tears of the Kingdom, so the game is decidedly taking place after Breath of the Wild. But this line of dialogue is the first and last time the Calamity is mentioned for almost the entire game, and the one and only time it's mentioned in the main story. This NPC in Rito Village refers to this rock formation as Va Meadows Perch, a reference to the Divine Beast from Breath of the Wild. And there's a side quest where you sit in on a class at the Hateno school about the Calamity, but that's what? 2 things? And you're not guaranteed to see either of them. But these are just details. Let's talk about the giant mechanical elephant in the room. What the fuck happened to the Sheikah technology. This was on everyone's mind going into this game. If you made it through this game without wondering where all the shit from the last game went, you either didn't play Breath of the Wild or you're lying. The game's director, Hidemaru Fujibayashi, said in an interview that the Sheikah tech just up and vanished one day. Calamity Ganon had been defeated, its purpose had been fulfilled, so it just disappeared. Putting aside for a moment how terrible this answer is, and even putting aside the fact that they had to clarify this in an interview rather than make this information accessible somewhere in the game, there are two main problems with this explanation. The first problem is that there is still some Sheikah tech around. The Skyview Towers are Sheikah tech, the Purapad is Sheikah tech, Robbie's weird little mini Dogu looking thing is Sheikah tech, the travel medallions are Sheikah tech. It didn't all disappear, and we know that because we see it, we interact with it. It's still there, at least in some capacity. The second problem is that we know the Sheikah tech was used during the battle 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild. We see it depicted in this tapestry, and we know it was stored underground after that battle. It's been used before without disappearing, so why would it vanish after the events of Breath of the Wild? It's not because Ganon is gone, he's right there. The answer, of course, is that nobody cared enough to think this through. It makes me wish they hadn't said anything and had just left the Zeltics of the world to come up with some sort of satisfying explanation.
The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is
complete fucking bullshit.
I'm frustrated by how they handled the Sheikah tech, and I think the explanation given sucks, but it is an explanation. And since the game isn't getting DLC, that's basically where the conversation ends. But there's another lapse in continuity that I don't see people talk about as much as the Sheikah tech, and it honestly bothered me way more. I am, of course, referring to the decision to replace Malice, this evil purple goop, with Gloom, this evil red goop. On the surface, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but I assure you, it is. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's probably because the English localization of Breath of the Wild failed to make it clear just how important the Malice was. So let's back up for a second. In Skyward Sword, the earliest chronological entry in the Zelda series, the main villain, Demise, swears that he will return and places a curse on Link and Zelda, ensuring that his hatred will be born and reborn again in every generation. The purpose of this curse is to contextualize Ganon's repeated appearances throughout the series, but even the word curse isn't necessarily accurate, and it removes this scene from its context. The internal name for Malice in Breath of the Wild is actually grudge, more in line with its original Japanese name, onnen. This word is used primarily to refer to grudges that persist after death, and it's the same word that Demise uses when he curses Link and Zelda at the end of Skyward Sword. Malice connects Breath of the Wild to the rest of the series and reinforces the overall mood of the game. We see it all over as a reminder of the corrosive nature of Demise's hatred, the ways in which, even now, thousands of years into the future, it poisons the world. Just look at what it does to Naydra. There's a thematic resonance to Malice that's always been very interesting to me. So the first time I heard someone refer to this red substance, which we'd seen in the trailers for Tears of the Kingdom and all assumed was Malice, as Gloom, my jaw was on the floor. Gloom's Japanese name is Shoki, roughly miasma, and seems to just generally have some vague negative effect on people's health. This is a downgrade of astronomical proportions, but it actually gets worse, because look at what happens when you beat a boss in Tears of the Kingdom. What the fuck? That's definitely Malice. Look at the seized construct, the difference is even more clear here. That is Malice. But like, why? What is it doing here? Malice is never mentioned in the entirety of Tears of the Kingdom, and its only appearance is here at the end of the boss fights. I genuinely do not know what to make of this. Maybe someone watching this video will have some sort of explanation as to what the hell's going on here, but I suspect the answer is that there isn't an answer, unfortunately. The decision to just write the Sheikah tech and the Malice out of Tears of the Kingdom entirely is evidence that the developers didn't care at all about Breath of the Wild beyond using it as a first draft. One of the most common criticisms of Breath of the Wild's story is that its world feels empty, like a bunch of disparate elements without a real connection. We've already mentioned the areas with story potential from Breath of the Wild twice now, and the reason I keep hammering this point home is that a competent sequel could have tied these disparate set pieces together to weave a cohesive narrative that strengthened Breath of the Wild on replays. Because now, instead of these places being meaningless ruins, they would act as foreshadowing for the reveal of a larger story. But there is no larger story. Every place that sparked theorizing 6 years ago is just as empty now as it was then. In failing to so much as acknowledge these landmarks, Tears of the Kingdom says our design choices didn't have any significance in Breath of the Wild. We didn't care then, and we don't care now. That might sound extreme, but think about it. The excuse we all made for Breath of the Wild, myself included, was that the story was intentionally vague because the designers wanted us to put the pieces together ourselves. We knew a sequel was on the way, so the unanswered questions weren't as frustrating, at least to me. But Tears of the Kingdom handling its story in this way doesn't just harm itself. It cheapens Breath of the Wild on replays as well. The spell is broken. These places cease to represent compelling mysteries that might one day be solved because we know they never will be. There really is nothing here. I return to somewhere like Satori Mountain, and instead of wondering about its deeper meaning, I feel stupid for ever thinking there was one to begin with. And I know I'm not the only one. Even the bigger creators who literally make content about Zelda for a living are releasing videos about how Tears of the Kingdom disappointed them. When you've disappointed the professional Nintendo fanboys, you fucked up. Big time. Tears of the Kingdom does not present itself in a way that suggests any sort of respect, either for its predecessor or for the people playing it. And I think that's most evident in the way it handled Breath of the Wild's most compelling mystery, the one most central to pre-release theorizing, the one brimming with potential. That's right, it's finally time to talk about the Zonai. Scattered around Breath of the Wild's world were ruins that shared a unique, distinctive architectural style. The identity of the people who built these structures was one of, if not the biggest, unanswered question from Breath of the Wild. There was the Thundra Plateau, a strange monument in the Ridgeland region with a constant thunderstorm pouring down on it. There was the Typhlo Ruins, the forest maze full of animal statues shrouded in darkness. There were 3 massive, imposing labyrinths at totally different corners of the map. And there were, of course, the Zonai Ruins, home to the Spring of Courage in the Faron region. The Faron region in general was full of these stone animal statues, some of which were identical to the ones found in the Typhlo Ruins. But what was most fascinating about them was that they always depicted the same 3 animals: the owl, the boar, and the dragon. The dragon is associated with courage, as evidenced by the Spring of Courage. Owls are associated with wisdom, both in the Zelda series and in real-life mythology, and the pig represents Ganon and his attribute of power, as evidenced by his, big pig. These animal motifs seem to suggest that whoever built these statues knew about the Triforce, something that's very interesting given that this was the first game in a very long time to not mention the Triforce at all. The choice of these specific animals is noteworthy for another reason, and that is that in most depictions of the Wheel of Samsara, the Buddhist cycle of death and rebirth, the 3 animals at the center, representing the 3 root evils that keep people trapped in the cycle, are the snake, the rooster, and the pig. So these statues didn't just suggest knowledge of the Triforce, it suggested a real understanding of the forces at play that keep Link, Zelda, and Ganon locked in this eternal struggle. With the release of Creating a Champion, it was confirmed that the name of the tribe responsible for the ruins around the world was, in fact, the Zonai. We knew very little about them, with most of the in-game information coming from the flavor text on the barbarian armor, which was found within the 3 Lomé labyrinths. So the Zonai were an ancient, warlike tribe from the Faron region. They were human, or at least roughly human-sized, given that the armor fits Link perfectly, and they have since gone extinct or disappeared in some way. Their major sites were also home to Sheikah shrines, so maybe there was some connection there? They seem to know enough about the history of Hyrule to build statues that represent the Triforce, but that was all that we knew. Some people were doubtful that the Zonai even existed, or at the very least, doubted that they were going to be important in any way. But then, in that fateful 10-minute gameplay preview, Eiji Aonuma picked up a strange item, and we all lost our minds. The Zonai were real. The game was about them. The community had been speculating since the very first trailer that the Zonai were involved with the game's story to some extent, but this confirmed that we would finally be learning more about this mysterious group of people that vanished long ago. To its credit, Tears of the Kingdom doesn't bury the lead. Zelda's off talking about how the Zonai were real and also the Hylians fucked them within the first 5 minutes of the game. It's quickly clear, though, that something is not quite right. When Link wakes up on the Great Sky Island, surrounded by this white stone architecture complete with neon green lights and holograms, he's in an environment that's completely devoid of the aesthetic signifiers we had come to associate with the Zonai. None of the sparse information we got either in Breath of the Wild or Creating a Champion mentioned or even implied that the Zonai were another high-tech ancient civilization, and why do this? Why have a second ancient civilization? I know you can't just put more Sheikah shrines in the world. They wanted to change up the aesthetic for the new game, I get that. But was there no other reason they could think of for having there be shrines in the world? Did it have to be another technologically advanced ancient civilization. The shrines could, for example, ditch the technology thing altogether and just be magical in origin. And that seems to have actually been the plan originally. The battery meter was apparently supposed to be a magic meter, something that's nearly ubiquitous throughout the other games in the series. But the devs opted to model the Zonai devices after real-life electrical appliances. The reason that they did this, at least according to them, was so that people would look at something like a Zonai fan and intuitively understand what it was, how it worked, and how to use it. And, I mean, these read pretty clearly as a take on modern technology, but we did the whole technology thing 6 years ago. If they were trying to create magical items that took visual inspiration from real-world electronic devices, I think they failed. These don't read as magical to me at all. This is just high-tech nonsense in a high-fantasy world. But okay, fine. The Zonai were a technologically advanced race of furries who descended from the heavens sometime in the distant past. One Zonai, Rauru, was the first king of Hyrule, apparently. I've heard some people say that having Rauru be the first king retcons the entire series, but I don't think that's the case. I think Rauru here is pretty clearly meant to be the first king of this version of Hyrule. And this interview with Aonuma and Fujibayashi seems to suggest that as well. As Jaywitz once so wisely said, though,
the problem is the everything.
On the other side of Tears of the Kingdom, we still know almost nothing about the Zonai, despite them supposedly taking center stage. We never hear about a Zonai character that isn't Rauru or Minoru, not even a mention of the rest of their family. And by the time the events we see in the memories take place, the two of them are already the only members of their race left. Ganondorf makes it seem like the other Zonai left of their own volition, and nothing in the game suggests that the other Zonai were displaced or killed. So where did they go, and why? The answer is that there isn't an answer, and if you're tired of hearing me say that, imagine how tired I am of saying it. The Zonai also built these funny little guys, the Constructs, to maintain and protect the kingdom, or something. For as much as I love how cute they are, they pile on even more questions about the events that took place before this game. For starters, we see these broken down constructs all over the Sky Islands, and there are some in the depths as well, and you have to wonder, what determines which constructs fall into disrepair and which ones remain intact by the time Link encounters them? Something cool about the Guardians in Breath of the Wild was the way they existed in various stages of decay. Some of them were inactive, some of them were rusted but still worked, some of them were missing legs but could still wake up if you got close to them. There was variety that made them feel like part of the world, rather than just an asset pasted on top of it. The constructs don't change at all based on their environment, and there's a disappointing lack of visual variety among them as well. They all use the same model, even though they each seem to serve a specific role. There are ranger constructs, mining constructs, forge constructs, and even culinary constructs on the Great Sky Island. Imagine this guy with a little chef hat. Maybe then Tears of the Kingdom would have won Game of the Year. The biggest problem with the Zonai's integration into the game world is that we have no idea where they lived, what their life was like, how they spent their time, or anything. Tears of the Kingdom makes no effort to tell us the story of these people, despite letting us explore the very Sky Islands they supposedly created and once inhabited. On that note, let's put a pin in this discussion for now, because it's time to talk about the rest of the world design, and it's only fitting that we start with... Ready for a change of pace? I love the sky in Tears of the Kingdom. At the very least, I really want to love it. It's my favorite part of the game by a significant margin, though that's kind of damning by faint praise. The sky has its fair share of problems, something I'm sure you expected me to say, but those problems are rarely as distracting in the sky as they are on the ground, let alone in the depths, and don't worry, we'll get to the depths. Let's start with the positive. The most obvious strength here is the visual design. The sky in this game is fucking gorgeous, and usually I'm so busy appreciating the lighting or the colors that I forget how boring whatever I'm doing probably is. The sound design is also perfect as always. The wind whistling past you as you skydive down, accompanied by that light and airy piano tune that resolves when you touch down, never fails to put a smile on my face. In its strongest moments, the sky evokes that lonely yet serene feeling I loved so much in Breath of the Wild. The Great Sky Island's only inhabitants are the Constructs, who've been acting out the same routine for thousands of years. Tasks that have long since ceased to mean anything as the civilization around them is gone. The area feels not only ancient, but also unstuck in time, fittingly floating untethered in its own world. A lot of people compare the Great Sky Island to the Great Plateau, and I think structurally that comparison makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a comparison I made earlier in the video. The biggest difference between the two, though, is that the Great Plateau is a condensed version of the wider world, like a preview of coming attractions. The end of the tutorial is the beginning of the rest of the game. The Great Sky Island, on the other hand, is the first and last time you'll be exploring the sky in the same way you explore the rest of the world. Even the Thunderhead Isles, the second biggest landmass in the sky, is only a fraction of its size and is more of a linear series of platforms than an explorable area. There are also 2 dungeons in the sky, both with a short lead-up section, so that's 4 major points of interest in the sky, one of which is the tutorial, so it's really more like 3. Everything else you'll do in the sky will be on these disconnected random pieces of geometry or miscellaneous sky islands. If you haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, or if you haven't played it in a while by the time you're watching this, you may not fully grasp how truly empty the sky is. So let's look at what happens the first time you ever obtain a map of the sky. I think this speaks for itself. Don't get me wrong, some of these little sky islands have puzzles or challenges that are fun. I liked this mirror puzzle, I loved skydiving and then snowboarding down Mount Lanayru. The dive ceremonies were a fun demonstration of Link's mobility, as was maneuvering around the lasers on Zonite Forge Island. But all of these one-off moments are just that, one-off. Disposable pieces of content that you're never really incentivized to return to, beyond brief trips to the gacha machines when you run out of Zonite devices. Actually, even the larger areas like the dungeons and their lead-ups, the Thunderhead Isles, and the Great Sky Island are similarly disposable. You can return to the Great Sky Island for an incredibly short and simple side quest, the only purpose of which seems to be to reveal to the player that these islands used to be on the surface. But this is something Rauru hints at within the first hour of gameplay, and you see the Temple of Time on the surface in the memory cutscenes. You don't learn anything new here, and after this, there's genuinely no reason to come back. Also, as part of this side quest, these giant waterfalls appear all over the island, which, aside from looking cool, gives you a new way to interact with the area by using the Zora armor. A major change to a playable area like this never happens again outside of the main story. And to add insult to injury, the island goes back to how it was before when you finish the quest. This issue of areas giving you no reason to return to them was a complaint I heard over and over again about Skyward Sword around the time of its release. But even Skyward Sword had you returning to areas with some sort of twist, like the flooded Faron Woods or the Silent Realms. Areas like the Rising Island Chain, the Wellspring of Hyrule, Lightcast Island, the Mazes, or the aforementioned Zonite Forge Island, on the other hand, are truly disposable, with the game never asking you to go back there. And these are the larger pieces of content on offer. A truly baffling number of Sky Islands are just these X-shaped platforms devoid of life, characters, significance, or any sort of identity. It's here that we return to the idea of a video game world. The reason these platforms are here is so the developer of this video game could put shrines on them. We don't get a sense that people lived here. Link is the only one who's ever up here, and like, why? The Rito can fly, the Zora can swim up waterfalls, human characters can ride in hot air balloons, hell, I could even imagine the Gorons using a cannon or something to launch themselves up into the sky. You're telling me that this game has a dedicated Zonai research team, but not a single one of them has tried to go up to the Sky Islands? The place with all of the Zonai stuff in it? We see researchers down in literal hell, but they're not going to go explore the fanciful realm above the clouds? What, are you crazy? Are you fucking kidding me? These design choices reinforce the sense that this world exists solely for the player to traverse and then discard. It's sad, because the stuff to do up here is among the better content in the game, but there just isn't enough of it to justify the damage that having this amount of vertical mobility does to the overall world design. But my issues with the sky mostly boil down to, I wish there was more content, or I wish the content was better. I don't hate the sky at all, and I hope it's an idea they revisit in the future. You know what I do hate, though? The Sky Mine. Hey, quick question, what the fuck is this? Absolutely nothing about this series of disconnected platforms so much as suggests that mining operations took place here. There's the one floating rock at the top with some ore on it, but there are no minecarts, no mining equipment, and no constructs. In a game with mining constructs! I repeat, there are no mining constructs mining in the Sky Mine. This is actually so egregious that I can't help but wonder if they planned to do something with this and then ran out of time? Or forgot? It's so strange that this game took 6 years to be made on a recycled engine with reused assets and it still feels this unfinished. We don't even have to wonder what a mine in the sky would look like since there's already one on the Great Sky Island. Now that I think about it, there are no forge constructs on Zonite Forge Island. There isn't any Zonite there either. With how many times this game asks you to stick fans on minecarts, you'd think the Sky Mine would be a slam dunk use case, but it's just more nothing. Starview Island, the huge sphere with the fairly simple but fun mirror puzzle inside, was a nice piece of content to discover, but what purpose did it originally serve? We know the Great Sky Island was lifted into the air and was originally part of the service world, but what about the other islands? Who built those, and when? The sky should be the most interesting part of this game, but it's so bare bones that the whole experience just feels cheap. The sky honestly feels unfinished, and during the writing of this video, I came across a series of interviews with the game's developers that actually confirmed that, yeah, it kind of was. Apparently, they initially filled the sky with content, but the designers scolded them for making the sky too messy. This was heartbreaking to learn because a Tears of the Kingdom with a more fleshed out sky would certainly not be perfect, but it would be considerably better. The worst part is that the work that could have gone towards making the sky amazing seems to have been directed elsewhere. I've heard many people say that the Depths was the best kept secret of Tears of the Kingdom prior to its release. It should have stayed kept. I struggle to see the addition of this place as anything other than embarrassing. Imagine if Breath of the Wild was just a giant grassy field. No desert, no snowy mountain ranges, no tropical rainforests, no villages. The only variety in terrain would be Death Mountain. This hypothetical game would have no day and night cycle, a number of interactable characters so small you could count them all on one hand, no wildlife, no weather, no puzzles to solve, no shrines to complete, just a Hyrule-sized empty field plus a volcano. That game would rightfully be treated as a complete joke, which is why I have no idea how people justify the Depths. But okay, let's back up a bit. Before I get into how much the Depths suck and why, here's a quick overview in case you've forgotten or if you didn't play the game. As a part of the upheaval, this game's dollar store knockoff of Breath of the Wild's Calamity, chasms opened up around Hyrule. Go down any of these chasms and you'll end up in the Depths, an inverted version of the surface world completely shrouded in darkness. Down here, your objective is to travel to the light roots, these giant glowing plants, maybe? They certainly look like plants, they're called the light roots, but they're directly connected to the game's shrines and you activate them using the Rauru hand like the rest of the Zonai tech, so they don't seem organic? Putting their vague origin aside, activating one will illuminate the surrounding area and add it to your map along with a fast travel point. There's a light root directly beneath every shrine on the surface, so there's a total of 120 of them to discover. 2 of the game's 5 dungeons are down here too, but you could just as easily put them on the surface or in a cave and it wouldn't really make a difference. You'll come down here most often in search of Zonite, which is a new resource we've already talked about that's apparently used to create Zonite devices? It's not clear. But aside from the mining cave on the Great Sky Island, it can only be found in the Depths. The thing that's always bothered me about Zonite is that its inclusion feels completely unnecessary. We already have a glow-in-the-dark blue-green ore in this game, the Luminous Stones. These serve no purpose in this game beyond feeding them to these weird dinosaur creatures in this one area on the surface so they can poop out more valuable gems. Yes, really. I struggle to understand why they felt the need to introduce a second blue-green glowy rock, but I also don't understand why they felt the need to introduce a second ancient civilization, so at least they're being consistent. If you haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, it's hard to properly convey just how little there is to do down here. People criticized Breath of the Wild for being too big and empty, but at least Breath of the Wild had shrines to complete, people to talk to, ruins to explore, towns to visit, side quests to do, different biomes to run around in. You get the idea. The Depths have none of those things. Look how different the Faron region looks from the Gerudo region, which looks different from the Akkala region, which looks different from the Hebra region. In the Depths, it all looks exactly the same. This issue is exacerbated by the solid walls that correspond to bodies of water on the surface. You can stand on top of a mountain on the surface and see a landmark all the way across the map, but the presence of these walls means that even with all 120 light roots activated, you'll never be able to see one side of the Depths from the other. It's visually exhausting to be down here, just drab colors and the same copy-pasted assets as far as the eye can see. On the surface, you can find different flora and fauna depending on where you are. You'd explore Faron if you were looking for bananas or mighty thistles, for example. If you want to find a smotherwing butterfly, go to Eldin. Voltfruit, hydromelons, Saflina, those are all common across the Gerudo region. Take a wild guess where you can find Tabantha wheat. There are unique resources to collect no matter where you go on the surface, but you'll only ever find bomb flowers, puff shrooms, and muddle buds in the Depths. These can be useful, sure, but there's never really a reason to visit one region of the Depths over another. I guess there's kind of an exception. You can find different weapons in the different regions of the Depths. These weapons haven't decayed like the ones on the surface have, making them stronger and more durable. The issue is that the only way to get them to appear is to break a non-fused, decayed version of the corresponding weapon on the surface, then wait for a blood moon, then go looking for the item in the Depths. Most players will fuse every single one of their weapons with some sort of material to make them stronger, since it's completely impractical to use weak, fragile weapons when you can prolong their lifespan and increase their damage just by fusing them to whatever materials you have lying around. This means that for many players, the pristine weapons on offer in the Depths will only ever be the Traveler's Sword, Spear, and Claymore, the weakest set of weapons and the default regardless of what region you're underneath. The treasures in the Depths don't typically have any real connection to their corresponding surface locations either, and even when they do, there's nothing new. The only new treasure you can find down here is the Miner's Set, and I guess auto build? Everything else is recycled amiibo and DLC items from Breath of the Wild. The depths suffer even more than the sky from that video game world syndrome we keep coming back to. Why are there monsters down here? So you can fight them. Why are these weird ascend spots here? So you can use them to ascend. Why are all these weird Zonai device platforms down here? So you can build stuff. Why are there bosses down here? So you can refight them for resources. The game doesn't even try to justify the depths by giving it story significance, and we'll talk about this more when we discuss the story, don't worry. For now, just know that the depths are empty, boring, full of recycled content, ugly to look at, and serve no purpose in the story. The gameplay loop of the Switch Zelda games basically boils down to 1. See a point of interest in the distance, and 2. Go there. But with the depths being so dark, the only points of interest visible from a distance are the light routes. The difference between seeing and then traveling to a shrine versus a light route is that, at least for the shrines out in the open, there will usually be content once you've arrived at your destination. When you activate a light route, that's it. That is the reward. You don't even get anything for activating all of them besides a little medal. They did this for the Korok seeds as well, but I think the difference is that having literally anything of substance as the reward for collecting all the Korok seeds would compel players to get all of them, which is asking a lot of the average player. It's not a new observation to say that the Korok seeds are side content and that you're not meant to get all of them. In contrast, it's very reasonable to expect players to find all 120 light routes, especially considering there's almost nothing else to do down here. So having a medal be the only reward feels more than a little underwhelming. Speaking of underwhelming, we should probably talk about the Yiga. This group of vaguely pro-Ganon ninjas was underdeveloped in Breath of the Wild, and not much has changed here. You fight their leader, Koga, multiple times across the depths, and those boss fights are pretty decent, but there's not a lot of substance to them, and his final fight is very similar to the boss of the Spirit Temple, so whichever one you do second is going to end up feeling cheapened as a result. Aside from him, the Yiga have these bases around the depths, but those are never difficult to clear out, and I say clear out, but it's not uncommon for there to only be one member guarding a given base, and it's only ever the weak foot soldier Yiga as opposed to the bulkier and stronger blade masters who only appear on the surface. Once you've defeated whatever singular enemy is guarding the place, you're given some crystallized charges for upgrading your battery, and you're also given a schematic that's saved to your auto build menu, letting you assemble the vehicles the Yiga use. The other place you can find schematics are at the various abandoned mines located under major settlements, including Terrytown for some reason. Terrytown was built from the ground up within the past decade, so what the hell's an abandoned Terry mine doing in the depths? These abandoned mines each have a forge that you can activate to purchase crystallized charges for upgrading your battery, and a construct that will give you a new schematic along with the parts you need to test it out. The schematics are a cool idea on paper, but there's rarely a good use case for them. If you're using auto build to summon a vehicle, more often than not, that vehicle will be... Has this ever happened to you? You've got a destination, but it's far away. Your light route is somewhere in the distance. Your sky island is out of reach. A body of water is sitting between you and your goal, and the hill you're climbing is too steep to drive a car. Don't you worry, there's a solution to all of your problems, and I do mean all of them. Introducing the Air Bike. Why spend precious time trying to get the wheels to stick on a wagon just right? Why chop down a tree to build a raft? For the low price of just 9 Zonite, you can be zipping around this world on 2 fans haphazardly smushed together. The air bike, the hover bike, the flying machine, whatever you want to call it, embodies everything I hate about this game all at once. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with you, me, or anyone making the decision to use it. It's a very convenient build. But that's exactly the problem. I see endless praise for how Tears of the Kingdom allegedly encourages creativity and resourcefulness, or how the game rewards players who use their imagination to solve problems. If you search best Zonai builds on YouTube, you'll be inundated with videos with thousands upon thousands of views showing off these elaborate contraptions that you, yes you, watching this video on the toilet, will never build. You will never build these. Because why would you? The vehicles you build in Tears of the Kingdom have the same issue as all the rest of the content in this game. They are disposable. Die in combat? Goodbye, cool but impractical tank. Enter a shrine? Hope you didn't get too attached to that ATV you spent 15 minutes building because it's gone. The air bike is as popular as it is because the game rewards efficiency, not creativity. There are builds that go faster, or that are more visually interesting, or that serve more than one purpose, but none of them are as cost-effective as the air bike. Most of them won't be nearly as maneuverable either. And in a world where your rockets, wings, and balloons will disappear after a minute or two, this device made of 2 fans and a steering stick has 30 minutes before the fans disappear, and that's a limit I've never personally come up against, since I will have moved on to the next thing long before that time runs out. It made sense to me to talk about this now, because the sky, and especially the depths, are particularly susceptible to being rendered irrelevant by the bike. You could fight your way through an area like the Wrist Mine on foot, or you could skip the area in its entirety by flying over it. Shit, you can fly over the entire depths, only stopping to pick up treasure chests or mine for Zonite, and you won't miss anything of value. The only times you'll be faced with a building task that can't be invalidated by the air bike will be when you have to move something heavy around, because the air bike will get weighed down and be unable to fly. In those cases though, the game will always give you materials to build the specific vehicle you need for the task, if not outright give you a pre-built contraption to use. My issue is not with the bike, it's with the game around it, a game that punishes creativity and rewards efficiency even when it means optimizing the fun out of the central gimmick. At this point, we've talked about the surface, the sky, the depths. We've talked a little bit about the Zonai and about the air bike, but from here on out, we're going to be talking about the dungeons, the shrines, the story, the characters. This is where shit gets serious. So get ready, buckle your fuckle, and prepare for impact. One of the most integral parts of the Zelda experience is exploring a game's dungeons. Making your way through unique spaces full of puzzles and enemies with a boss at the end and some item that you pick up along the way is honestly what Zelda's all about. That's why when Breath of the Wild released with a pittance of dungeons that many felt were too short and too simple, people were not happy. Rather than having temples or caves as settings for the dungeons, Breath of the Wild had the Divine Beasts, the 4 giant animal robots that were originally constructed to fight Ganon but were corrupted by his malice. Every beast worked in basically the same way. You needed to use your Sheikah Slate to adjust the rotation or position of the beast in order to activate a handful of terminals, culminating in a boss fight with one of 4 almost identical bosses. There weren't locked doors that you needed keys to open, the puzzles were pretty weak, and in general, they went by very quickly. And yet, despite their shortcomings, I kind of love the Divine Beasts. Having these giant corrupted animal mechs that move around the overworld that you need to board and take control of, it's sick. It's fucking awesome. What, are you kidding me? But I also understand why people were disappointed, especially considering the precedents set by previous Zelda games, especially Skyward Sword, the game that directly preceded it, which had some of the best dungeons in the entire series. Interviews leading up to Tears of the Kingdom's release suggested that the devs had basically gotten the memo on the Divine Beasts. People weren't happy with them, so they were going to do something that was more in line with what people had come to expect from the Zelda series. That is not what happened. The dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom are pathetic. With the exception of the Lightning Temple, they are all worse than Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts. At least the Divine Beasts had cool integration with the overworld, a distinctive animal motif, and required you to think about three-dimensional space in some way, through manipulating their inner workings or their position. Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons have the exact same progression structure as the Divine Beasts, in the sense that all you do is walk around and activate terminals, but the mechanic of manipulating the layout of the dungeon in some way was scrapped altogether, and in its place is nothing. To make matters worse, you're returning to the same 4 areas you explored in Breath of the Wild, talking to largely the same people and seeing the same sights as before. This time, Link is sent out by Purah to investigate 4 regional disturbances, hoping they'll connect in some way to Zelda's whereabouts. When you arrive in one of the 4 regions, you'll see Zelda doing something obviously evil or at the very least suspicious. And then in the process of chasing after her, you end up in the dungeon. As part of this process, you'll meet a returning character from Breath of the Wild who will join up with Link for the lead up to the temple as well as the temple itself. Once you've beaten the boss, your new friend will awaken as a sage of their particular element, and then you get the ability to summon them as you explore the rest of the world. Whatever problem was affecting the region goes away, and the player moves on to the next thing. But wait, what about Zelda? We'll talk about this when we get to the discussion of the story, but unfortunately this evil Zelda thing never goes anywhere. It's basically just a carrot on a stick to get the player to explore the dungeons, and so I guess now it's probably time to stop stalling and actually talk about them. The dungeon the game absolutely wants you to do first is the Wind Temple at Rito Village. Purah will not so subtly nudge you that way, and the ability you get as part of that quest is useful in traversing the rest of the world. A lot of people praise the lead up to the Wind Temple, the part where you climb up the rising island chain with Tulin, and it's praise I'm willing to agree on. The moment of flying up above the clouds as the background noise falls away and the light washes over you, and then you skydive into the eye of the storm and the music swells and it's fucking euphoric. It's spectacular. What's not spectacular is everything preceding it. Rito Village is suffering from a blizzard, which doesn't seem like that big of an issue. Link's movement isn't affected at all by the blizzard, and even though the bridge to Rito Village is out, this is the race of bird people, yeah? The ones who can fly? I think this issue would feel more serious if the winds were stronger, something Nintendo's been able to do since Mario 2. No, not that one. That one. If the Rito couldn't fly or something, it would make sense that they'd be suffering like this, but this winter weather isn't inhibiting much of anything as far as traversal's concerned. You can still run, jump, climb, and glide like normal, which I think ultimately hurts this sequence. It also means that Tulin's wind power that propels you forward is useful, but not necessary. If you needed his power to steady yourself while gliding in the blizzard, it would underscore the severity of the situation, make Tulin feel like a really helpful ally and not just like a kid you're babysitting. So you get to Rito Village and you wander around for a bit, talk to a handful of characters that don't matter at all, go looking for Tulin in this cave, and complete the Herculean task of getting his bow back from an enemy that dies in one hit. After you beat these incredibly basic enemies together, Tulin decides he now understands the value of working as a team. This is supposed to count as a character arc for him. We get a single scene with him between meeting him and this epiphany, and it's just embarrassing. Frankly, Tulin is barely a character. I like his design, I think he's very cute, but in Breath of the Wild he was basically just a background character, and going into Tears of the Kingdom I cared way more about the characters I remembered from the previous game. For people who didn't talk to every single NPC in Breath of the Wild, this kid is a perfect stranger, and 10 minutes after you meet him, his arc is supposedly resolved. So once he's had his revelation, you need to make sure to speak to him in just the right place so you don't accidentally make it all the way up to the Wind Temple without him. Something that's very possible to do, only to get stuck. I think the devs even considered this as a possibility, because they give you a completely worthless blessing shrine at the top of the climb, presumably just to use as a warp point back up, which makes no sense given that the Wind Temple has a warp point of its own, unless you consider the fact that if you get up to the Wind Temple without Tulin, you can't activate the warp point and will have to abandon all the progress you just made and go back down to retrieve him. Also, I know people really like this section for its atmosphere and music, and I do too, but let's be real. The actual gameplay here is pretty weak. You don't even need Tulin to get through this area, and if you built the air bike, you can just skip it altogether. There's never a moment where you have to think about where you're going or how you're going to get there, because the answer is always just go up. Once you're in the temple itself, things are not looking too promising. You see a massive locked hatch, try to open it, and it doesn't work. A mysterious voice tells you to open the hatch by releasing 5 locks, all of which are immediately marked on your map. The locks also look conspicuously like giant fans, but rather than letting that design speak for itself, Tulin will stop you to tell you to use his power on it. Thanks! I didn't realize I'd need to use the wind power in the Wind Temple on the wind fan with the wind bird. Very helpful. This dungeon has the exact same structure as the Divine Beasts. Wander around, activate terminals, fight the boss at the end. I have nothing to say about the puzzles here because they're all extremely simple. Make a lever, attach some stuff to other stuff, none of it requires you to think about the space you're in, and it's over before you know it. I liked the boss though, credit where credit is due, smashing through the ice on its body felt amazing, and the music? So, Colgera explodes, global warming returns to the village, and oh boy. Tears of the Kingdom has these cutscenes when you finish the 4 main dungeons, and they are, without exaggeration, identical to each other. Here is how every single one of these cutscenes plays out. The sage says their descendant's name.
Tulin, my brave fledgling.
Yonobo, little rock.
Sidon, my cherished kin.
Riju, beloved daughter of the Gerudo.
The descendant says, I know that voice. You're the one that's been talking to me.
I know
that voice. You're the one
who's been talking all this time.
The sage says, yes, I am your ancestor from long ago. I served the first king of Hyrule. I was a warrior and a sage with control of element.
Yes, I am your ancestor.
From a time long past.
I served the first king of Hyrule as a Zora warrior.
And a sage who called down lightning.
I have seen you control element in battle. You are the pride of insert people here.
Where you fight, the winds follow.
Impressive.
I would expect nothing less from my descendant.
You are the pride of the Gerudo.
The sage says that the boss the descendant just defeated was summoned by the Demon King in order to stop them from finding their secret stone.
That monster you defeated.
The source of those foul rocks.
It was a servant of a greater evil, the Demon King.
The monster's true purpose was to prevent you from obtaining that stone.
My secret stone.
The descendant says, secret stone? Demon King?
Demon King? Secret stone?
Secret stone? Demon King?
Demon King? Secret stone?
The sage says that they will explain everything and that they need to tell you the story of the imprisoning war.
This is a lot to learn all of a sudden. I know.
Then listen carefully to what I have to say.
It concerns the imprisoning war and
the events that shaped our people's destiny.
The sage then tells the exact same story beat for beat. In the time of Hyrule's founding, the Demon King appeared and sought to destroy anyone who opposed him. Rauru, the first king of Hyrule, along with the sages, rose up to oppose him. In order to do this, Rauru gave the sages secret stones, objects that amplified their powers. The sages faced the Demon King in battle, stronger than ever thanks to their secret stones, but were no match for the Demon King. In the end, Rauru sacrificed himself to seal the Demon King away, and the descendant goes,
"So that was the imprisoning war."
And the sage says, "Sometime later, the Sage of Time came to visit, and the destiny of our people was clear."
Some time later.
The Sage of Time, one of the 6 sages,
came to visit me.
And she set the Gerudo on our destined path.
Zelda says,
"The magic restraining the Demon King will be undone. When that happens, a noble swordsman named Link will oppose him. He needs the help of your people and your element. Please, lend him your power."
The Demon King will return. The magic binding him will be undone. When that time comes, a noble swordsman named Link will oppose him. We must help. Lend him your power. The Gerudo's control of lightning.
The sage reiterates that the future of their people was made clear to them in that moment.
It was clear what part the Rito would play.
In that moment, the duty of the Goron people was clear.
The course of the Zora's future was clear.
The path of the Gerudo was clear at that moment.
The sage in the past says, "It would be my honor to fight the Demon King. I swear when he returns, my descendant will awaken as a sage."
It will be an honor to defeat the Demon King. I swear to you that when the Demon King returns, the Rito Sage of Wind will awaken once more. I'd like nothing more than to smash the Demon King. I swear that when the Demon King returns, the Sage of Fire will awaken again.
It would be our honor to aid in defeating the Demon King. I swear to you that when the Great Evil returns, the Zora Sage of Water will awaken once more. We wish nothing more than to eliminate the Demon King. I swear to you that when the Demon King returns, the Gerudo Sage of Lightning will awaken once more.
And the sage says, "You may have saved insert town here, but the Demon King is still out there."
You've saved Goron City.
However, the Demon King
still remains a threat.
Then they tell their descendant to fight the Demon King with the swordsman Link.
Fight the Demon King
alongside
the swordsman
Link.
This is absolute insanity. Once you've seen one of these cutscenes, you've seen all of them. There is zero variation between them, and I genuinely struggle to understand how the people working on this game found this to be even remotely acceptable. Beyond being repetitive, these scenes are so weak. These ancient sages all wear masks, so we don't know what their faces look like, and more egregiously, they don't even have names. These scenes could have shown us an ancient version of the Rito, Goron, Zora, and Gerudo societies, and helped us better understand what life was like in the distant past. But instead we get a copy-paste job that's so lazy, and I firmly believe it will haunt this game's reputation long into the future. These scenes are also completely pointless because they all amount to fight alongside Link, but they've been doing that. We literally just beat a whole dungeon together. Remember? They made a cutscene that goes, "My cherished descendant, do the thing you were already doing," and then copy and pasted it 3 times for good measure. So after the Wind Temple, Tears of the Kingdom wants you to do the Fire Temple. I've seen some people say this temple isn't that bad, and I've heard others say that it's actually their favorite, and I've got to ask, like, respectfully, what the fuck are you talking about? This has got to be one of the worst Zelda dungeons ever, and if the Water Temple wasn't giving it a run for its money, I'd say it's easily the worst dungeon in this game. The story kicks off in Goron City, where everyone is hooked on this addictive new drug, what they're calling marbled rock roast. They've lost the motivation to work, and all they ever want to do is sit around and eat. Haha, I get it. They're stoners. Because they're rock people? Yunobo is back from Breath of the Wild, and his voice is as grating as ever.
Now stop flapping your rock chompers and get over here, Goro!
He's not acting like himself, and he even tries to fight Link, but he's a total pushover, and much like Tulin, he gets his character arc over with before it's even begun. He was being controlled by an evil luchador mask given to him by Zelda.
The one we never see from the front or close up, always in the distance doing vaguely evil things, that's my girlfriend, Princess Zelda.
Once you've snapped Yunobo out of it, you take a short minecart ride up Death Mountain until you're at the summit. This giant monster appears, and you're meant to use a Zonai vehicle to fight it, which I know because the game spawns one right next to you, pre-assembled and ready to go. This boss fight's over very quickly, and seems like its purpose is mostly just to get the player used to using Yunobo's ability. It's a shame too, because I think this boss is way cooler looking than the actual boss of the Fire Temple, but I digress. You jump into the chasm at the top of Death Mountain and make your way down into the depths where the dungeon waits, and it's it's dog shit. Just like before, you need to open a handful of locks by going around and activating mechanisms that are conveniently perfectly suited to the partner you've got with you. This dungeon plays with verticality, or at least it thinks it does. It gives you all these minecarts to get from place to place, but this is Tears of the Kingdom. Whether it's a hot air balloon, rocket fuse to your shield, ascend, or especially the air bike, the content of this dungeon becomes trivial. The puzzles here aren't even good. Build a ramp here, ascend there, riveting stuff. This place is big, but there's nothing of substance to do here, so it just feels like a painful slog. I alluded to this already, but the boss didn't impress me either. It's a stun it and then hit the weak spot until it dies boss, which feels very Zelda, but less in a nostalgic callback way and more in a dated, formulaic way. Once you've beaten the boss, you watch the Secret Stone Demon King cutscene, and all the Marbled Rock Roast disappears from Goron City at once.
Oh man, they are in for a rough 2 weeks.
Yeah, they're all fucking sweating and
detoxing at the same time.
The Water Temple's up next, and it's the same as all the others. Go to the place, talk to the people, watch a character have their entire arc in a single scene. If you're bored listening to me repeat this over and over again, imagine how bored I was playing it. Shout out to this puzzle though, where this Zora historian is puzzling over a broken monument that you have to repair with a missing piece that's 5 feet away. Did I mention this game costs $70? You have to go back and forth a bunch between Zora's domain and this new area called Mipha Court, then you need to solve a fairly simple riddle, at which point the game makes a decision that I still can't really wrap my head around. It has you explore the ancient Zora waterworks. If you haven't played this game, that might have gotten your attention. The idea of some sort of ancient structure under the East Reservoir Lake sounds like the perfect place to put a dungeon, but you only come down here to push a single button. Literally. This area exists so that you can activate this terminal that allows you to enter the sky via a massive waterfall that you can swim up using your new Zora armor. There is nothing else to do here. You can come back after the dungeon for an armor piece and there's a bubble frog like in every cave, but there's zero story here. No explanation of what purpose this space could have originally served, no insights into how the ancient Zora lived, nothing. And it's a crying shame because look at this place. It's fucking awesome down here, but in the greater scope of the game, it's completely irrelevant. And like, why? Why have Link come down here if the temple's in the sky? Why introduce this element at all if you're not going to develop it? This area's inclusion is so bewildering to me because it feels unfinished. Maybe it only exists to pad out the quest, but by the time you enter the waterworks, you've done about as much as you do before the other temples, so I genuinely do not understand what the purpose of this area is. Also, you can skip the whole thing with a rocket shield. Great. Once you're in the sky, fittingly, things start to look up. At least a little. This area is in low gravity for some reason. It's never explained why gravity works like this here, shocker, but it does shake up the normal gameplay a little, and it's honestly just fun. You climb up to the water temple, but the game doesn't even pretend to include your party member this time. Sidon just says, hey, let's split up, and then you meet him at the entrance. This temple is definitely the weakest in the game, but it's not aggravating like the fire temple is, and it being easy means it's over quickly. Shoot this switch, move this bubble, activate these terminals, you know the drill by now. Watch the same cutscene again, and the game sends you on your way. Oh, right, the boss fight. I think it's funny that the boss of this dungeon is just a little guy, but he's pretty annoying to fight and isn't particularly memorable. I don't have more to say than that. The last of the 4 main dungeons is the Lightning Temple, and it's by far the strongest dungeon, not only in Tears of the Kingdom, but in the Switch Zelda games as a whole. It still wouldn't crack the middle of a ranked list of all Zelda dungeons, but it's still a clear cut above the rest. The desert's shrouded in a massive sandstorm. Gerudo Town is completely destroyed, its residents hiding in an underground shelter as Gibdos, monsters somewhere between insect and undead, roam the streets above. You find the chief, Riju, struggling to hone her lightning power so she can better combat the Gibdos. You team up with her and defend the nearby Karakara Bazaar from the Gibdos that have appeared there, then return to town for a brief section where you organize the troops around town to best prepare for an invasion. This sounds cooler than it actually is. Your choice of where to put the soldiers doesn't really make a difference since it's a small enough number of enemies that they're not likely to overwhelm you, but at least it's something. Then you solve another pretty simple riddle that has you trudging through the desert to connect these beams of light. The sandstorm blocks out your map and makes traversal a bit more challenging. At least it would, but it's very easy to just fly above the storm and then it poses no challenge whatsoever. So the temple pops out of the ground, you walk up to it, no fuck! Jesus fucking Christ, what is that? This isn't even a criticism of the game, by the way. This thing's just fucking horrifying. I don't want this anywhere near me. So the first thing you do when you arrive at this dungeon is face off with its eventual boss, Queen Gibdo. It's a fun shake-up to the formula and also acts as sort of a teaser for the actual fight. Once he's taken enough damage, she'll flee to the top of the temple, so it's time to head inside. You have to make your way through the catacombs filled with traps, and Riju works differently than the other party members you've had so far, in that she can't just teleport to your position, so you need to actually clear a path by disabling the traps so she can follow you through the dungeon. Before you can get too excited though, you find yourself in a central room with 4 locks, and then it's back to the formula. This is still more involved than the others though. You'll have to reflect light, actually think about the space you're in, and since you need Riju to activate the terminals, you'll need to consider whether she'll be able to make it to where you are at any given moment. Compare that to the Fire Temple, where you can just go under a locked door, use Ascend, and Yunobo will be there waiting for you. I'm not sure why they didn't make every party member work like Riju, but I'm happy that at least this dungeon has something going on.
I don't know why this temple isn't just like all the other temples. It's a really good thing I did this temple last, or I'd be really disappointed by all the rest of them, because this temple is very involved, and the other temples were very stupid.
So you activate the terminals, fight the boss, watch the same scene for the 4th time, and then Gerudo Town is magically back to normal. I get that the other towns also just get their issues instantly resolved, but none of the towns were in as dire a state originally as Gerudo Town, and it would have been nice to have some sort of quest that let you assist in rebuilding it. Still, it's pretty good for what it is, and I'm relieved that at least one of these dungeons isn't a complete waste of time. The next place the game sends you is back to Lookout Landing to check in with Purah. It's at this point that you're treated to the shocking revelation that obviously fake Zelda is, in fact, not actually Zelda. No way! You go to Hyrule Castle after this, and I know some people consider this to be a dungeon, but I think that's being very generous. You just go to the waypoints on your map, fight some monsters, and then meet up with Not Zelda in the throne room for a fight with Phantom Ganon. I kinda glossed over this during my initial writing and recording process, but going back and editing this really drove home just how bad Hyrule Castle sucks in this game. Hyrule Castle was a highlight of Breath of the Wild, a foreboding stronghold where Calamity Ganon was lying in wait. The freed Divine Beast's red lasers, which were visible from just about everywhere on the map, were a constant reminder of the showdown that was waiting for you at the end of your journey. There's no other word for it, I'm sorry. Storming Hyrule Castle is epic. Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule Castle is abysmal. It's no longer interconnected, there's no sense of discovery or exploration. I understand that people don't just want to explore the same castle all over again, but then show us new areas. Show us pathways originally obscured by the Malice, or rooms that were rebuilt, or most interestingly, show us the Astral Observatory, the location of the battle with Calamity Ganon, and yet another giant question mark from Breath of the Wild. Also, why the giant pillar? You have islands floating in the sky. If you're gonna lift up the castle, then commit to it. You just fight scores of the same monsters you've been fighting for the entire game, fight Phantom Ganon, who you've probably already fought by now too, all in search of a Zelda that you absolutely know by now is an imposter. There's no unique boss fight, there's no reason to come back, it sucks. Okay, back to past me. You win in battle but lose in the cutscene, the sages show up just in time to stop Link from getting gloomed again, Ganondorf pieces out, and Riju has the only intelligent thought in the entire game.
Hold on. He must not be at his full strength. Otherwise, why flee instead of finishing us off?
The gang returns to Lookout Landing and realizes there was a 5th sage in the ancient past, Raru's sister Minoru. In order to gather more information about her, Link finally goes to Kakariko Village. The Sheikah in general got kinda shafted in this game. You don't ever need to come here until you're already done with the first act of the game, and you never come back after this. The purpose of this visit is to send you down to Faron to visit the Zonai ruins to look for more information. This is pretty much the only connection between the Zonai in Breath of the Wild and the Zonai as they appear in Tears of the Kingdom, but it's purely superficial. You go into the only 3 open doors along this river, get a cute new outfit, and then that mysterious thunderstorm above Faron is cleared away so you can explore the islands it was hiding. These are the Thunderhead Isles. You explore them mostly by riding on rails and making your way towards the island shaped like a dragon's head, fittingly named Dragonhead Island. This would be a cool sequence, except for some reason Dragonhead Island is the lowest hanging island in this archipelago, so you can skip this exploration entirely and just ride a falling rock up or take the air bike, or you can make a hot air balloon, or you can shoot yourself out of a Skyview tower. This is an interesting piece of structured content, but it's so easy to skip that it makes me wonder why they even bothered. I did this quest in my most recent playthrough just to get footage of it, but you can explore the Thunderhead Isles without clearing the storm. That's actually what I did in my first playthrough. I brute forced my way through this area and arrived at Dragonhead Island much earlier than intended. I was so excited when my exploration led me to the Construct Factory, which I assumed was a bonus dungeon and a reward for braving the thunderstorm, and I was extremely disappointed to learn that this was not only part of the main quest, but also significantly easier if you do it when you're supposed to. Once you make it to Dragonhead Island, you're faced with a door that takes a pitiful 10 hearts to open. Your health in this game maxes out at a whopping 40 hearts, and if you're doing this when you're supposed to, you'll have gotten a heart container during the tutorial, one from each of the dungeons, and one from Hyrule Castle. That means that you only need to do 4 shrines in order to have enough hearts to progress past this door. If the goal is to prevent players from going directly here from the starting area, first of all, why? And second of all, isn't that the whole point of the thunderstorm? I don't understand why this door is here. But you open it, find Minoru's mask, and are guided down into the depths where the 5th dungeon, the Construct Factory, is waiting. I actually kinda like this place. It's one of the few times the game asks you concretely to engage with the building mechanics in order to solve puzzles and make your way through this place. You do the same 4 terminals bullshit as always, but this time at least there's a twist. The terminals come at the beginning of each section, and each gives you a piece of a large construct. There are 4 of these body part depots, 1 for each arm and 1 for each leg. The door locks behind you once you've interacted with the terminal, so you'll have to make it through each depot while bringing the robot component with you. The visual design here focuses a lot on the decay. The railings are breaking down, pieces aren't where they should be, parts are lying on the ground, and giant clumps of mold are growing all over the walls. This place feels suitably ancient and decrepit, and while the puzzles are generally too simple and can be skipped with recall or rockets, at least they tried. The actual content here isn't bad, but then you bring all the parts back to where Minoru's mask is waiting for you and put the robot together, and wow. You build this mech, this customizable mech suit, powered by the ghost of a technologically advanced furry lady, and it's so slow, it's so weak. Link is defenseless while riding it and still takes damage. It takes up a huge chunk of space on the screen, it gets in your way, it sucks. How do you mess this up? The preceding section of assembling this robot feels suitably important, like it's leading up to something big. And then you can't even kill the group of enemies that the game puts in your way to show you your robot's new powers. So you and your disappointing new friend make your way to the Spirit Temple, which isn't actually a dungeon like you might think based on the name. The actual dungeon was the Construct Factory. This is basically just a boss arena, where you fight a gloomed up Minoru bot in a boxing match. It's simple, but it's decently fun. Once that's all wrapped up, you get a cutscene that's not exactly the same as the others, but it's pretty close, and you still don't learn anything new.
いや、悠久の先、貴様を討つ者が必ず現れる。大魔の剣を持つ剣士、リンク。この名を忘れるな。リンク。面白い。楽しみにしておくぜ。
Minoru takes her place on your team as the 5th Sage. The color of the Sage abilities don't match up with the color of the regular abilities though in the menu, and it makes me irrationally angry. And it's here that I have to ask, why Minoru? All of the other ancient sages pass their title onto their descendants, and I get that Minoru is the Sage of Spirit and can continue to exist until the present day because she was hanging out in Zelda's iPhone the whole time, but there's another option staring us all in the face. Purah. Everything seemed like it was set up to have Purah awaken as the new Sage of Spirit. She's a researcher like Minoru was. She's got as big a role in the main story as anyone else gets in this game. She's even got a little mask that she wears on her forehead. This could have allowed the writers to tie the Sheikah into the Zonai in some way and create some continuity there. And since Minoru's spirit moves on at the end of the game, there's nobody to take up her role. It honestly feels like Nintendo wanted Purah to be the new Sage of Spirit, but like, forgot? All of the pieces are seemingly in place to make this make sense, but instead we get an underpowered mech and an undercooked story to go with it. What a mess. There isn't anything like a Ganon's castle at the end. You just make your way through the foundation you explored with Zelda in the opening until you make it to the imprisoning chamber. So that's where our discussion of the dungeons in this game ends. Hopefully you understand now why I truly believe, with the exception of the Lightning Temple, that the Divine Beasts were better. And that's not praise for the Divine Beasts, it's an indictment of the excuse for dungeons we got in this game. Much like Breath of the Wild though, most of the puzzle solving in this game is relegated to the 152 shrines spread across the world. And if you're hoping those shrines make up for the dungeons, I've got some bad news. Alright, here we go. There are 152 shrines to discover in Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule. This is the section that I've spent by far the longest developing and thinking about. And I actually have another video in the works that will be an in-depth look at every shrine in the Switch Zelda games. I've played every single shrine in this game 3 times, which doesn't sound like that many times until you realize that in my most recent playthrough, lining up all of my shrine footage gets you 12.5 hours of footage. And that was my 3rd time going through them, more or less already aware of the solutions to puzzles. My first playthrough was my casual experience, my second playthrough was so I could rate the shrines and take notes, and the 3rd time was so I could record footage of the shrines and give them a second rating. All of this is to say that I've probably spent more time thinking about, playing, and analyzing the shrines in this game than your average player. I'm shrine pilled. I'm a shrine expert. It's shrine time. It's prime time for shrine time. I even made this giant spreadsheet to put all my thoughts in one place. Ready for my take? The shrines in Tears of the Kingdom are bad. To be clear, many of the shrines in Breath of the Wild were also bad. I actually think Breath of the Wild's lows go lower. There isn't anything in Tears of the Kingdom on the same level as something like the motion control puzzles or the Test of Strength shrines. But Breath of the Wild has some shrines that really are great. Trial of Power and Blue Flame are longer form shrines with multiple steps, lots of hidden treasure, and a central mechanic that asks different things of the player. They're not as long as even a mini dungeon in something like Ocarina of Time, but they're still somewhat developed and are pretty widely regarded as some of Breath of the Wild's stronger shrines. Shrines like Buried Secrets, Canon, Moving in Parallel, Ancient Trifecta, and the Winding Route all have some sort of quest associated with them in order to unlock them, and then they have a puzzle on the inside as well. In fact, Breath of the Wild had 42 shrine quests, meaning roughly 1/3 of the game's shrine content had some sort of quest associated with it. In theory. As far as I'm concerned, there's 3 types of shrine quests. I've split them into levels. Level 1 is for shrines that an NPC can tell you about, but that you can also just stumble across on your own. This shrine in the Eldin region or this shrine on Mount Lanayru can be found without ever speaking to their respective NPCs, for example. Level 2 is for shrines with a task to complete or a riddle to solve in order to enter them, but you can stumble across the puzzle without ever speaking to the source NPC. For example, it's incredibly easy to see this giant thunderbolt mural and fire a shock arrow at it to reveal the shrine without ever speaking to this guy. You can do the 7 Heroines puzzle without ever talking to this lady, and you can shoot the statue with the glowing eyes in the graveyard without anyone telling you to do that. Finally, there's level 3, shrines that require you to receive a quest and then complete it in order to reveal the shrine. This includes quests like the Fragmented Monument, Stranded on Eventide, the 3 Korok Trials, Shrouded Shrine, and so on and so forth. Breath of the Wild supposedly has 42 shrine quests then, but if you only count level 3 quests, the number is closer to 30. Sorry to talk about Breath of the Wild shrines for so long, but it's important to establish some examples of how Tears' prequel handled its shrines so we can understand how much worse they are here. Even the best Breath of the Wild shrines can be pretty forgettable, but that probably has more to do with the fact that they all look the same on the inside, and the fact that not every player is going to take the time to find, let alone complete, every shrine. Before we move on from Breath of the Wild, though, it's important to note that the Champion's Ballad DLC gave us 16 new shrines, and they're almost exclusively excellent. I especially love the shrines on the remixed Great Plateau, where it's all gloomy out and you're reduced to a quarter heart, making obstacle courses or enemy gauntlets much more threatening. The DLC for Breath of the Wild convinced me that Nintendo had stopped fucking around and had hit their stride with the shrine designs. If the sequel was going to have learned anything from Breath of the Wild's DLC, its shrines would blow its predecessor out of the water. But then, you know what happens next. Tears of the Kingdom has a scant 31 shrine quests, despite having 152 total shrines, which is more than Breath of the Wild has even after DLC. Of those 31 shrine quests, 25 of them require you to haul a crystal somewhere. Even the more interesting shrine quests, like this one where you have to show this guy a giant horse, still end with you dragging a shrine crystal around, even if it's for like a grand total of 2 minutes. Of the 6 remaining quests, Maka's Special Place and the White Bird's Guidance are level 1. It's entirely possible to just stumble across these shrines without ever speaking to these NPCs. The High Spring and Light Rings is level 2, because this island will be here regardless of whether you talk to this guy, and the task it asks you to complete is pretty intuitive. Just go down the mountain, which leaves Keys Born of Water, Legend of the Soaring Spear, and Dying to Find It as the only level 3 shrine quests that don't involve a crystal. And that's only 3 quests, so let's break them down. In Keys Born of Water, this construct tells you to offer the titular Keys Born of Water to these 3 stone pedestals. There's a campfire and a whole bunch of frost emitters nearby, and this quest is situated right next to a body of water. You have to create ice platforms, either by using these frost emitters or some other method like an ice fruit or a sapphire rod, and then hold them over the fire to melt them until they're the right size to fit in the 3 holes. The reward is an empty shrine. In Legend of the Soaring Spear, you come across this journal in a cave with a couple of Zonai spears nearby. The riddle says, throw the Zonai spear with the wing from the pedestal through the ring. This isn't even a riddle, it's just telling you what to do. Attach a wing to the Zonai spear, throw it through the ring, and your reward is an empty shrine. In Dying to Find It, you have another construct issuing a riddle, this time telling you to paint the pattern black on the opposite wall, which you do by attaching planks of wood to this rotating thing, and then waiting until it casts a shadow onto this pattern, and your reward is an empty shrine. Hey, there sure are a lot of empty shrines in Tears of the Kingdom, huh? How many, you may ask? 51 of them. 52 if you count this one that's a cute little fake out, which I do, because an empty shrine that subverts your expectations is still an empty shrine. That means that in a game with 152 shrines, over a third of them are empty. And the astute viewers in my audience may remember that there are only 31 shrine quests, 3 of which lead to non-blessing shrines. So if only 28 of those are accessed via quests, that's 24 shrines that are just sitting in the overworld waiting for you to find them. Some of those 24 do have content, to be fair. Content that isn't tied to a labeled shrine quest. In fact, exploring the underground prison ruins doesn't happen as part of a shrine quest, it leads to a blessing, and it's one of my favorite shrines in the game. Some of you may also say that finding these blessing shrines never bothered you, or that you even felt relieved to find them, but I think that's actually a point against the shrines with puzzles in them. That the shrines are so boring that it's a relief to find one that doesn't ask anything of you. I'd say we don't have time to discuss every single shrine, but we also don't really have to, because Tears of the Kingdom's shrines repeat ideas and concepts so often that we can pretty easily talk about every type of shrine without dwelling on each one individually. We can save the individual thoughts for the shrine video. The first group of shrines on the list is the only group that every player is guaranteed to play, the 4 ability tutorials. These aren't bad, they're just simple, which you obviously expect from tutorials. These 4 shrines are found on the Great Sky Island, which is itself this game's tutorial section. And while you learn about the abilities and how they work inside the shrines, you're asked to put them to the test outside the shrines, something the game doesn't seem confident about asking you to do pretty much ever again after this. But I'm getting ahead of myself. While you're on the Great Sky Island, you'll learn to chop down trees to build things with logs, build rafts with fans attached to them to carry you over bodies of water, attach fans to minecarts to push you along rails, and you'll even be introduced to the wing device, which you'll be using a lot throughout the game. There are more than just those 4 tutorial shrines though, because the next type of shrine we're going to talk about is the device tutorial. The spring, steering stick, stake, wing, rocket, mirror, sled, small wheel, fan, balloon.
Yes, I am saying them all to emphasize the point.
Stabilizer, big wheel, hoverstone, hydrant, and those water orbs from the water temple all have a shrine where the purpose is just to introduce the device and show you how it works. The big wheel, wing, and hydrant actually have 2 shrines each that are incredibly simple and serve as an introduction to the device and nothing else. There's nothing wrong with having shrines that introduce concepts in theory, but in practice there are 2 main issues. The first is that the player is not guaranteed to use any of this knowledge outside of shrines because the game rarely asks you to get creative with solutions to traversal or puzzles. The small wheel tutorial shrine teaches you to attach a wheel to a rail like this, and that's cool, but you will literally never do this again for the rest of the game. Even if you wanted to, this type of platform doesn't appear in the overworld, so it's not teaching you anything of value. The big wheel shrine asks you to think about the physics engine in a creative way with this puzzle, but it's the same issue here. The game will never test you on this knowledge or take it to the next level. This is partially because it can't. Since there's no way to know which shrines players will have encountered, you can't test players on something they may not know how to do yet. This was a problem in Breath of the Wild too, but Breath of the Wild didn't have almost 20 shrines dedicated to teaching you mechanics you either already know about or will never use. Speaking of mechanics you already know, that's the second problem with these device tutorial shrines. By the time you're off the Great Sky Island, you know how to use fans to propel things forward, but the game still has a shrine that teaches you how the fan works. Even if this is the first shrine you encounter fresh off the tutorial, it will still be repeated content. And that's the best case scenario. In my most recent playthrough, the fan tutorial was the 144th shrine I played. More than 80 hours in, I was being told that I can use a fan to push objects forward. No shit. For those of you who aren't keeping count, that's 19 shrines in addition to the 4 ability tutorials. 23 tutorials, but I'm not done yet because there's also the combat shrines. One that teaches you the basics of dodging and parrying as well as the spin attack, one that teaches you about parrying again, one that teaches you about stealth and sneak strikes, and inexplicably there are 2 each for archery and throwing things. These are manifestly unnecessary. The player will know all of this by the time they leave the Great Sky Island, especially if they've already played Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild had a combat tutorial as well, but it just had 1. If you've made it to the shrines where they teach you how to throw stuff and you haven't already figured it out, these tutorials are not going to help you. If you need proof of this, I urge you to watch the Game Grumps play this game. The other problem with the combat tutorials is, well... by far the worst offender here is the Sneak Strike tutorial. This construct can spot you if you so much as breathe too loud, and every time you're caught, you need to try again, after you sit through the extremely slow-moving, unskippable text. So that's 30 total tutorial shrines on top of the aforementioned 52 empty shrines. Let's talk about those next. The crown jewel of empty shrines is the Otutsum Shrine in the Gerudo Highlands. This is just an empty shrine. It's sitting out in the open, it's easily visible from the sky, you go in, it is an empty shrine. This is easily the most pathetic shrine in either of these games, and its inclusion is genuinely mind-boggling. The Irasak Shrine is also in the Gerudo region, this time in the desert. I think the challenge is supposed to be this pool of quicksand around the shrine or something, but you end up right next to it when you're completing the main quest in that region, and you can very easily just glide there from the Lightning Temple. Even if the intended solution is to ride the planks through the quicksand using recall, that's not a puzzle that warrants a blessing shrine at the end. It's barely a puzzle at all. There are 2 shrines in Tears of the Kingdom that exist for the sole purpose of being used as warp points. One is at the end of the Rising Island chain, I mentioned it during the discussion of the Wind Temple, and the other is on Dragonhead Island. I definitely feel negatively about the one next to the Wind Temple, but I do think it's important to have a way to easily travel to Dragonhead Island considering the door that takes 10 hearts to open. If you made it there early like I did, it would really suck to have to turn around with no way to get back. I understand that there's another proper shrine in the Thunderhead, but it's much higher up and much harder to get into before you've cleared the thunderstorm during the main story. Do I wish this warp shrine had content? Yes, of course, I wish every shrine had content. But this one doesn't bother me as much as the one near the Wind Temple. Next up, we have the Cave Blessings. These are exactly what they sound like. They're empty shrines where the whole challenge, if you can even call it that, is just finding them in a cave. You might remember that Tears of the Kingdom has just under 150 caves, so hiding shrines inside said caves makes perfect sense, and it could be interesting to comb through the cave systems of Hyrule looking for shrines. At least it would be, but there are 2 mechanics that work to make this task laughably easy. The first is the Shrine Sensor, a feature that returns from Breath of the Wild that blinks and makes noise when you're near a shrine. Being able to play hot and cold is not a dead giveaway though, you still need to find the correct cave and then figure out where exactly the shrine is. Unfortunately, the depths exist, and it doesn't take long to notice that every shrine has a matching light route and vice versa. Light routes are often the only thing you can see from any sort of distance in the depths. It's not hard to find all of them. By cross-referencing the surface with the depths, you will know where the cave shrines are 100% of the time. It's worth noting, by the way, that there are shrines in caves that aren't blessings, 7 of them actually. It makes the 8 of them that are just flat out empty feel like cut content, like they took 6 years to make this game and they still haven't finished it yet. The highlight in this group has to be the Geotack Shrine in the Elden region. You go through this underground minecart course filled with lava and enemies, and there's something of a traversal task involved. The empty shrine at the end brings it down, but it's more substantial than just following a marker on your map. Speaking of just following the map, up next, we've got a particularly shitty triad. Remember the mazes from Breath of the Wild? They're back, unchanged, and they still reward you with empty shrines. If you remember how to get to the shrines, it's mindlessly easy to just jump into the maze from above and walk straight to the end. This is especially unfortunate in the case of the Akkala Labyrinth, because there's this super cool cave that goes under the ocean and leads to the basement of the labyrinth. There's a mini-boss fight in the cave with the Hinox, and then you'll have another fight with Phantom Ganon when you emerge in the basement. It puts a much-needed twist on the otherwise recycled maze content. What makes this unfortunate is that it's completely and totally optional. You can, very easily, just glide to this island. That's what you do in Breath of the Wild. If this maze had metal bars over the top, for example, so you couldn't enter that way, this shrine would likely be one of my favorites for the twist it puts on a recycled area. But since the cave portion is so optional that it's basically irrelevant, I'm mentioning this maze alongside the other 2. On a more positive note, these 2 shrines in the sky that make you reflect light in the overworld using mirrors are some of my favorites. They're a little simple, I wish there was more to them, but I'm a total sucker for light puzzles in Zelda games. Also, I like the low gravity. I wasn't really upset that these shrines were empty, I was kind of expecting it by that point, and I had decent fun with them. The next group is a small one, there's only 4 of them, and they make up a group that I like to call the Not Shrine Quests. A Not Shrine Quest is a task in the overworld that leads to a shrine but isn't associated with the quest. 2 of these are great and 2 of these are horrible. Let's get the stinkers out of the way first. Remember the Shrine Sensor I mentioned earlier? That comes with a tutorial of its own. One where you have to follow Robbie down to the depths, take some pictures, fix his hot air balloon, then meet him back at the Hateno Ancient Tech Lab to get the sensor working. Then you enter a nearby cave to receive a free shrine for your troubles. Except for the little wrinkle being that this shrine is always there, and if you're using the depths to find the shrines on the surface, it's entirely possible to find this shrine before you ever speak to Robbie. The second awful not shrine quest involves transporting this guy, Cezanne, to meet up with his friend, Finley. Aside from this whole relationship being more than a little gross, seriously, the trope of characters being much older than they look needs to be retired, like at least 30 years ago. What the fuck is it doing in these games? You can just ignore them. Get cockblocked, weirdo. Leave this kid alone before I call Chris Hansen. And yes, I'm aware that this whole relationship thing can be somewhat chalked up to a translation error, but only somewhat. I don't think anyone would have been upset to see these two go the way of the divine beasts and be retconned out of existence. A much stronger not shrine quest is this game's take on Eventide Island. This NPC, Sesame, is part of a monster control crew and asks for your help taking the island back from the monsters who've occupied it. You don't lose all your items like you do in Breath of the Wild, but you still need to clear out 3 enemy camps around the island, then head around back to take on a 4th group of enemies aboard a pirate ship. Once you've defeated them, a gate will open that leads to the shrine. I call this a not shrine quest because for some reason the quest you receive when you talk to Sesame is categorized as a regular side quest instead of a shrine quest, even though you need to complete it in order to get to the shrine. It's got all the trappings of a proper shrine quest, and it would be inaccurate to categorize this as a cave blessing, even though it is in fact a blessing in a cave. The last not shrine quest I want to mention is something I briefly mentioned earlier, and that's exploring the ancient Gerudo prison ruins. This is an underground maze of sorts, full of enemies, atmosphere, and personality. It being underground means you can't just look at the map to find the shrine like you can with the labyrinths. You can still use the depth to pinpoint the shrine on the map, but you can also see the shrine pretty early into exploring the maze. The puzzle is in traversing the area to figure out how you get there. It's not as involved as something like navigating the Typhlo ruins in Breath of the Wild, but it's definitely my favorite of the blessing shrines. Let's talk crystals next. I already mentioned that there are 25 crystal shrines, 24 of which are blessings. 4 of these fall more into the shrine quest category than the crystal category, so I'll bring those up when we get there. In the meantime, know that there are repeated ideas with these crystals too. The Natak, Josiu, and Genodoc shrines all require you to move a sky island using one of these little apparatus doohickeys. Tawny Nude and Okujisi both have you going around the back of a copy-pasted sky island, cutting some vines, and then building some sort of vehicle to transport the crystal. Another shrine does this too, but it's the one crystal shrine that has actual content inside. The Mayam, Ganos, and Kumamain shrines all require you to deal with a flux construct, and I say deal with and not fight or beat because you can just detach the crystal from the construct's body and leave without ever engaging with it. The flux constructs are great, at least the first couple of times you fight them, but they're everywhere in this game, and the novelty does wear off. Speaking of boss fights, the Sisuran, Usazum, and Momosik shrines all require you to beat a mini-boss in the overworld to obtain their crystal. These fights are never hard, and the whole thing just feels like busy work whenever I have to do it. Shout out to Momosik Shrine though, it's pretty cool to ride the minecarts. The Enoma and Gikaku shrines both have you dropping the shrine crystal down a great distance, which is satisfying, but did they have to do it twice? Rutafu Toki, Ikatak, Jonyu, and Moshapin are all cave crystals. Sometimes there are obstacles, sometimes there aren't. All of them are very simple and reward you with empty shrines. The 2 remaining crystal shrines are just crystals hanging out in the open world for no reason. One is here on Lanayru Road and asks you to fly a plane through a waterfall, which is a cool visual, but you have to smash a lot of rocks to get there. And the other is in the Gerudo Canyon with a pre-assembled car conveniently located nearby. The last kind of blessing shrine, and I promise we're almost done with these, I'm sick of them too, believe me, serves as your reward for the small handful of shrine quests given to you by NPCs. This includes riding the giant horse, giving this Korok 5 golden apples, taking a quick walk in the woods and beating up this Talus, buying the shrine rock off of this guy, and I'll throw in the one dive ceremony that rewards you with a blessing for some reason. That just leaves the Suariwak shrine, the one where you do the Yiga clan exam. Throughout the world, you run into these temporary Yiga bases and rescue 3 tailors being held hostage. Each base gives you a piece of the Yiga armor, and when you have the full set, you can enter the Yiga hideout as well as the Yiga Blade Master station, where you can take this exam. The task is pretty simple. Just offer bananas to these 5 frog statues. They're marked on the map, so there's not really much of a challenge in finding them, but needing to stay in disguise makes this task more interesting. The desert is hot during the day and cold during the night, so this mission forces you to think up some other ways to overcome the elements, by cooking, staying in the shade, or okay, here's the punchline, you don't have to wear the Yiga armor if you're not directly in front of this guy. It's not like in the Yiga hideout where you take off a single piece of the armor and are immediately ambushed and kicked out. There's no penalty for doing this. It's basically just walking around to 5 glowing waypoints and offering a banana. This shrine quest has the same structure as the game's dungeons, by the way. It's not good here either, and at least the dungeons come with a boss fight at the end. This quest just ends with you being let into a room containing a shrine for some reason. It feels very video gamey, but I'm more critical of it being boring than of it being contrived. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that each shrine will have at least one treasure chest in it. These often have their own little puzzles associated with them, but they don't ever give you anything good. Even in Breath of the Wild, you'd occasionally find pieces of an armor set, but in this game, the best thing you can get from a chest is like a bundle of arrows, maybe a big Zonite charge or a battery, maybe a Zonite weapon or bow. All of these are consumables, and the weapons will break so quickly that it never feels rewarding to find them. I didn't get all the bonus chests in this video, and no, I'm not sorry. I still spent 12.5 hours of my life in the shrines this time around. I did my time. We still have about 70 shrines left to cover. Don't worry though, these can be grouped into categories as well, starting with shrines in which the solution is literally just remembering you have your hand abilities. Shrines like stacking a path, building bridges, and moving the spheres don't test your abilities aside from the ability to remember you have Ultra Hand. A particularly egregious example of this type of shrine is building with logs. Absolutely nobody was asking for this. We learned how to build things with logs during the tutorial. Not all of these are bad. Built for Rails is pretty decent, for example, but it's not outclassing any of the better Breath of the Wild shrines, and it's still pretty simple. There aren't any shrines that ask you to use fuse in a creative way, besides maybe More Than Defense, which teaches you about the sorts of things you can fuse onto your shield. This is bordering on being a tutorial, and it's the only shrine in the game besides Fuse's tutorial where it's front and center, so not a great showing for Fuse. Ascend fares better, but not by much. The shrines that ask you to use it are usually very simple, and the objective is never more complicated than go up. The only exception I can think of is a prone pathway, where you have to hit switches to rotate this giant cube so you can ascend to the top. It's a decent puzzle, but it's still a one-room, one-note situation that you can skip with a rocket shield. Jailbreak is trying to be interesting, and I appreciate it for that, but it is not succeeding. It's too short to properly develop its idea, and that can be said of almost every shrine in this game. By far the worst puzzles belong to the Just Use Recall group. This shrine asks you to line up these rotating sections of a pillar and ascend to the top, and that's the entire shrine. This shrine has you hit a switch and then use recall on the shrine orb, and that's the entire shrine. This one is at least found in a cave, and a cave shrine that isn't a blessing is a very rare treat, even if the puzzle inside the shrine feels like an insult to my intelligence. Speaking of insults to my intelligence, possibly the worst shrine in the entire game asks you to use recall to bounce this ball into this switch, and that's the entire shrine. This shrine actually brings up another problem. See this target? If you use a bomb flower on it, it'll register as being hit. Anytime you see a target like this, you can bomb it and skip the puzzle. I have no idea why they would do this. It somehow makes puzzles like the one we just talked about even worse. The group of shrines hurt the most by this baffling choice is definitely the batch that has you hitting things. I labeled these kinetic energy puzzles. Mallet smash, lever power, or maybe lever power? I don't know. Swing to hit, the right roll, all of these just amount to hit the target. And even without the knowledge that you can just cheat your way through them using bombs, the puzzles themselves are not particularly complicated. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way, I'm just trying not to bore you to death with all the shrine talk. There are a great deal more shrines that can be undermined extremely easily by the player. Built to Carry and Forward Force, for example, both have you moving a shrine orb through a sort of obstacle course. And in both cases, you can just use Ultra Hand and Recall to skip the whole thing. Bridging the Sands wants you to explore this wide open area full of quicksand in order to get this orb back to its pedestal after it was launched across the room. But I've never even tried to do this, because it's infinitely easier to just use Recall on the orb, something every player will know how to do. These puzzles feel so carelessly designed. In my second playthrough where I took notes on all the shrines, a phrase that kept coming up was, "They forgot about Recall," and with good reason. People praise the ability to just bypass these puzzles because having multiple solutions to a puzzle sounds appealing. It allows players to solve things their way rather than being constrained to a single path forward. I am not compelled by this argument. The entire open world exists for you to explore to your heart's content in any way you see fit. That is not what the shrines are for. Shrines, ideally, provide structured content that is effective specifically because of the limits it places on normal gameplay. It's a change of pace, and with the dungeons being the way they are, they're the main source of puzzles in this game. I'm not saying that having a puzzle with multiple solutions is a bad thing, but this is not a puzzle with multiple solutions. It's a puzzle with a kill switch. This issue extends to shrines I otherwise enjoy, too. Shining in Darkness is a maze you complete in the dark, but you come into these shrines with your full inventory, and the game has been training you since the tutorial to light up dark areas with Brightbloom seeds. Once you've lit the shrine up, there's really no challenge. I like the hiding spot for this key, and I like that there's a key in general. I miss locked doors. It's wild that the shrines have keys in them, but the dungeons don't, by the way. Unlocking this door leads to the end of the shrine, though. As soon as it gets interesting, it's already over. A shrine that I found myself enjoying on this most recent replay was Fire and Water, a puzzle that asks you to consider different elemental interactions in order to make it to the top of the room. Ice will melt, wood will burn, metal will conduct electricity, so it's up to you to stack blocks made of those materials and then ascend to the top. It's kind of reminiscent of Secret Stairway, a shrine from Breath of the Wild's DLC that I'm particularly fond of. I wish they did a bit more with this one. I think it would be one of my favorites if they had. I think it might still be one of my favorites just because of how weak the others are. Unfortunately, all of my praise for this shrine's puzzle is undercut by the fact that you can just do the recall trick or use a rocket shield to skip it. And don't even get me started on the rocket shield. The amount of shrine content that is completely trivialized by the ability to instantly gain a ton of height is ridiculous. They don't let you create updrafts to skip puzzles in in shrines, but this is okay for some reason. The only real deterrent is that you can't take rockets out of your inventory inside shrines, but you can very easily walk out of the shrine, fuse a rocket onto your shield, and walk back in. Bomb jumps and Octorok balloons don't launch you as high as rocket shields do, but those are arguably even worse, since you can assemble them within the shrines themselves. Next up, let's talk about puzzle shrines that repeat ideas. These are particularly annoying to me because rather than developing a concept throughout a longer form shrine, they spread the same idea across multiple shrines. We already talked about the 2 hydrant and wing shrines during the tutorial section, but those are just the tip of the iceberg. Deep Force and Flotational Brilliance utilize this buoyant ball and platform that don't appear anywhere else in the game, but both shrines are shorter and weaker than they would have been if they had just been rolled into a single longer shrine. It's the same thing for wind power and turbine power. These shrines are so similar and so simple. These are classified in my notes as spinny thing shrines, though I should note that there is a tutorial shrine called a spinning device that is not a spinny thing shrine. Glad we got that cleared up. Speaking of names, I understand that these shrine names and placements are based on real-world locations, but the names we got in the English version didn't do nearly as good a job of sounding different from one another as something like the French version. Look up the French shrine names for a treat, by the way. Breath of the Wild was guilty of this too to some extent. Shea Katha is different from Shea Loya, not to be confused with Sha Gemma. Then there's Shayota, but that's different from Shayuto. There's Dila Mag, Ruko Mag, Mag Halan, Mag Nora, and even Mag Latan, but that one's spelled differently. And if you think this is confusing, well, it is. But Tears of the Kingdom is somehow worse. For starters, Mayak and Mayam are 2 different shrines, both of which are distinct from Maya Chideg, which is not the same as Maya Chin or Maya Hisik. Maya Tat is not the same as Maya Mats, which is itself different from Maya Nas or Maya Otaki. There's Maya Siar, Maya Umekis, and Maya Usi. Jonyu is totally different from Josiu, which shouldn't be confused with Jochi-iu, Jochi-siu, or Jochi-ihiga. There's Jonsao, Jogo, Joku-u, Joku-usin, and Joju-u-u. Yes, really. Siwakama is different from Senakawak, which is itself different from Samosawak. Remember that shrine with the floating platforms from earlier? Flotational Brilliance? That one is the Rasawak shrine. No, not the Rasatakawak shrine, just Rasawak. But there's also a Rasatakawak. Whack is right. Those M shrines drove me so crazy that I made this graph showing the breakdown of shrines by the letter their names start with. I understand that this is more an issue with localization than with the game itself, and also more importantly, that this does not matter even a little bit, but this is my multi-hour Zelda video, and I'll go on a tangent about shrine names if I want to. Back on track. There's one more group of shrines I haven't mentioned yet, and I saved the best for last, the Proving Grounds shrines. These shrines strip you of all your armor, weapons, and materials you've collected so far, and put you up against some number of constructs. Your only weapons and materials are what you can scavenge from inside the shrine. There's usually a small weapons cache at the start of the shrine, but these are never stronger than basic wooden sticks. Most Proving Grounds shrines have some sort of theme or gimmick that makes them stand out from the others in some way. This one has water in it, making the shock arrows the enemies have particularly dangerous. This one is in complete darkness, and you can't get around that by using Bright Bloom seeds here because they take all of your items. This one has you running constructs over with vehicles, and it's easily one of the funnier shrines in the game, though the shrine where you attach weapons to Roombas and set them loose on your enemies is a close competitor. The ones that are least successful are the ones that want you to lure constructs into traps, because these traps don't actually do enough damage to be satisfying, and it's difficult, if not outright impossible, to lure the constructs to exactly the right spot. I say impossible because constructs wielding bows won't chase you, so you can't lure them. In Proving Grounds, lure. The one in the dark was an awesome surprise when I first walked into the shrine, especially because it was my first ever Proving Grounds shrine, and I had to do a dive ceremony to access it in the first place. I wish there were more enemies though. This is too visually striking and mechanically interesting to be over so soon. This Proving Grounds shrine can only be accessed by ascending into the room it's in, and it's located on the Thunderhead Isles, so your best bet is to try and access it after you've completed the quest that clears the storm. It's pretty much impossible to see otherwise, and you need to balance on a rail and then use ascend, which I'm sure is possible to do in low visibility, but I do not have the patience. I also think it's a little cute that this is an area surrounded by a thunderstorm, and it's the Electric Proving Grounds. My favorite Proving Grounds is also my favorite shrine in the game, and that's the one that has you shield surf down Mount Lanayru while going through rings. I was convinced this would be a blessing, so I was extremely pleasantly surprised to find not just a real shrine, but a Proving Grounds shrine, and a fun one too. You have hot air balloons, these platforms on rails that you can use recall on, and since you start at the bottom of the room, you're likely to be spotted early and be at a disadvantage, which makes things more challenging and more interesting. Great job, Zakusu. You may be second to last on my list of shrines sorted alphabetically, but you're number 1 on the list of shrines in my heart. I understand some people will argue that it's okay that most of the shrines in this game are simple because because this is a game for children. I understand the tutorial shrines. Kids play this game. My mom plays this game. Accessibility is obviously important. The problem isn't the low floor, it's the low ceiling. These puzzles never get good. They're never developed or iterated on in interesting ways. Even the Proving Grounds shrines are fun once, but then they're over. Zelda is known for challenging players to think, whether it's the infamous water temple in Ocarina of Time, or the harder dungeons in a game like Link's Awakening. Part of the appeal of the Zelda series was getting stumped, even frustrated, because the designers trusted you to figure things out. And it was so satisfying when things finally clicked. There wasn't a single puzzle in a shrine that made me feel like I had to think at all, let alone think creatively. You can mess around and solve things wrong if that's fun to you, but it would have been better to have puzzles that were designed with competent players in mind. I also understand the argument that the shrines have to all be simple because they can be played in any order and you don't want a new player stumbling into a super hard shrine out of nowhere, but there are literally zero consequences if a shrine is too hard and you need to leave and come back later. You unlock the warp point when you find a shrine after all, not when you complete it. So if you can't finish the shrine for whatever reason, you can just leave. You could also put the harder shrines further off the beaten path. Imagine if, instead of a blessing, those caves you had to explore led to extra hard challenges that were meant to test your mastery of the game or your puzzle-solving skills. We'll talk about this a bit more later when I talk about the steps I would take to fix the problems with this game, but for now, we're done talking about shrines. I didn't go over every single one, but I'm confident you've got the picture by now. I do plan on making a separate video that's just about shrines, though I would forgive you if you've forgotten by now that you're not already watching the shrine video. Don't worry, I still have plenty of things to complain about. Just wait till we get to the story. I got to this part of the script and had a bit of a realization. I didn't do almost any of the side quests. Even on my initial casual playthrough, I just never really wanted to engage with them. The tasks weren't going to be interesting, the characters were going to be annoying, and most importantly, I wouldn't get anything out of it. There is zero intrinsic motivation for me to talk to these characters. I genuinely do not care what they have to say. To be clear, this is not a problem unique to Tears of the Kingdom. It was like this in Breath of the Wild too. My issue is that they didn't fix it. There is a shockingly small number of NPCs that I find even remotely tolerable in these games. Most of them either have no personality, are extremely annoying, or both sometimes. I don't even know how that's possible. How'd you even do that, Tears of the Kingdom? What the hell's wrong with you? All of this is to say that I was not compelled to partake in these quests because of some amazing character writing. If I was going to do these quests, it was going to be because they were going to give me something that I actually wanted. And since almost none of the rewards in this game are any good, that means I did almost none of the side quests. Here is a complete list of every kind of reward you can get for completing a side quest in Tears of the Kingdom. There's materials, whether that's ingredients, gemstones, resources like wood, monster parts, or even zonai charges, cooked food and elixirs, rupees, arrows, weapons, bows or shields, sleepover tickets, pony points, and glider fabric. That's it. With the exception of the last three, this is just a list from Breath of the Wild again, a game that already didn't have enough types of rewards in it. It may seem hopeful that they added 3 new types, but I've got some bad news for you on that front. A sleepover ticket lets you spend a night at a stable for free, something that usually costs 20 rupees. Pony points count towards a total, and once you've earned enough of them, you get a reward, like the ability to register an additional horse, cosmetics for your horse, stuff like that. Aside from the fact that horses are tragically completely useless in this game, that sounds decent enough, right?
But I could give you pony points as a thank you.
I don't care about your fucking pony points.
You can earn them through side quests, but you can also farm them repeatedly by either sleeping at the inn or registering a new horse, both of which cost 20 rupees. So 2 out of these 3 new reward types are just 20 rupees with extra steps. As for the glider fabric, it's a cool idea to be able to customize the paraglider, but in order to change between fabrics, you need to go to Hateno Village, talk to this guy, pay him 20 rupees, and then watch this short cutscene. If there were a faster way of swapping between fabrics on the fly, no pun intended, it could be fun to play around with them. Maybe you could even coordinate them with your outfit or something. But needing to stop what you're doing and go get your glider fabric changed at a specific location makes me never want to do it. Also, I've heard people say that they're glad the items you needed amiibos to unlock in Breath of the Wild are available in Tears of the Kingdom without them, and I agree. Locking in-game content behind real-world, overpriced action figures is scummy, both from a corporate greed standpoint and from a preservation standpoint. If it became impossible to find amiibos one day, this content would be permanently inaccessible, which is why it sucks that Tears of the Kingdom locked a whopping 23 glider fabrics behind amiibos. That's nearly half of them. There was a lot more in it for the player in previous Zelda games. Being able to get a piece of heart for helping someone, for example, or gratitude crystals in Skyward Sword. Those made sense to receive after helping someone. Having some sort of new reward type added to Tears of the Kingdom would have incentivized players to interact with the side quests in some capacity, and I know this because unique rewards, when they do very rarely appear, are widely sought after. I slogged through this mayoral election subplot for a third time just to put Link's hood down, and you know what? It was worth it. I find CC insufferable, and I don't really care for the NPCs in this game in general, as you may have put together. Also, everyone and their mother gets to wear her stupid mushroom outfit, but Link can't. But just being able to change Link's appearance in a new way was more than enough motivation to follow the quest to the end, even though I didn't really enjoy the quest itself. I had to start the newspaper side quest and do the Stable Trotter's escort mission just to unlock the Great Fairy, and absolutely none of this process was fun in the slightest. I don't really care for Pen, and don't get me started on Mario over here. Forget the Koroks, I wish I could strap this motherfucker to a rocket. Oh yeah, the Koroks. The Koroks are another set of characters who seem to have completely forgotten who you are, including Hestu, their broccoli leader. Finding the 1,000 Korok seeds scattered across the map is not something I'm ever interested in doing. I love Breath of the Wild, but I'm never going to find all 900 Korok seeds. I accepted this many years ago. It's just not happening. Part of that has to do with the way the game screeches to a halt every time you find one. It's like the blue coins in Mario Sunshine. I have to decide whether I value the precious, fleeting time I have on this earth more than I do the task of collecting yet another literal piece of shit from one of these guys. I also appreciate the escort Koroks in theory, but they're a significant diversion from whatever it is you were already doing, and your reward is just 2 Korok seeds, which doesn't seem proportional to the amount of effort you usually have to put in, especially considering there's no weight to these quests. So moving this guy across a minecart track is treated exactly the same as moving this guy across the entire fucking ocean. I think I also kind of resent the backpack Koroks because, let's be real, this game was made for the internet. They knew people would strap rockets to the Koroks, or crucify them, or make them get dragged behind a horse, and would put clips of it on the internet. They made a game that markets itself. The whole building thing in general is primarily in the game, I think, so people can post their epic penis guy videos on Twitter. Same with the stupid fucking Ganondorf meme face, but we'll talk about that later. At some point on your journey, you'll run into this guy, Addison. He's struggling to hold his wooden sign up, and you need to help him by propping it up using nearby materials or whatever you can scavenge. I find him more than a little annoying, but it's a neat little distraction the first time you do it. There's a little wrinkle though, namely the fact that there are 81 of these challenges strewn across the map. This character is copy and pasted 81 times. This repetitive busywork task gets even worse when you realize you can just use a hoverstone to hold up his signs 100% of the time, something that's not hard to figure out considering the fact that the Water Temple familiarizes players with the device and how it works. Any players who've played the main story will know about hoverstones, and once you figure that out, the solution to every single puzzle is preordained. And then, whenever you do help him out, he gives you 20 rupees, some cooked food, and then one item like a mushroom or a bomb flower or a sleepover ticket, so 20 rupees. But he gives you these rewards one at a time, meaning you spend 2 seconds completing this puzzle, and then spend 2 minutes mashing A through all the text boxes. You get a glider fabric if you do all 81 of them, but we already talked about the issues there, and it doesn't change the repetitive nature of the actual task that you're being asked to complete. Tears of the Kingdom seemingly arbitrarily designates some side quests as side adventures. I guess the side adventures are supposed to be higher priority side quests? It didn't make me want to do them anymore, I'll tell you that much. The side adventures include the aforementioned questline that concerns the Lucky Clover Gazette, Hyrule's newspaper. You work with Pen, who I already hinted that I wasn't the biggest fan of, though he's grown on me, especially in the making of this video. It's not his fault that he's in this fucking game. You visit 12 of the stables around Hyrule looking for leads on where Zelda could be. Any quest that has to do with Zelda's whereabouts is necessarily going to be shitty for reasons we'll discuss when we finally talk about the story, but these quests are kinda weak sauce on their own anyway. Follow this trail of pine cones, escort this guy down the river, you get the idea, they're all like this. The reward for completing all of these quests also feels more than a little like a slap in the face. One of the most common talking points when it came to criticism of Breath of the Wild was how rain made you basically completely unable to climb. Tears of the Kingdom gives you the ability to brew sticky elixirs, which, aside from sounding nasty, are supposed to allow you to climb in the rain. The problem is that it doesn't actually work, and you'll still be sliding down the walls, even with the full set equipped. It's only once you upgrade the set that you'll be able to climb in the rain without slipping, because you'll gain the slip-proof bonus. And you'll only have access to the full set once you've already traveled basically the whole world looking for the stables in order to complete the quest in the first place. Speaking of upgrading your armor, the Champion's Leathers, Link's signature outfit from this game, or one of them I guess, is one of the best armor pieces in the game, but if you want to upgrade it, you're going to need parts from the Light Dragon. You can only get a dragon part once every 10 real-life minutes, and you need multiple of them per upgrade. This is a nightmare scenario. The idea of playing this game on a current patch without the duplication glitch makes me feel physically ill. I think if I ever ever accidentally updated this game, I would just never play it again. The fact that I was able to duplicate materials whenever I wanted is probably the only thing that got me through 3 playthroughs of this game. There's another side adventure called Madison's Independence that involves Hudson and Ronson from Breath of the Wild, and it's one of the few quests that comes with a unique reward, the ability to build your own customizable house. The mechanics there are fine, I guess. This video is a breakdown on the issues with it made by someone infinitely more patient than me, but more relevant to this discussion is the quest you need to do to unlock it. The following is everything you need to do to complete this quest. Talk to Hudson and Ronson to begin the quest. Talk to Madison. This time, talk to Madison over here and answer a single question. Put like a plank of wood or something in front of this guy to obstruct his vision, talk to Hudson again at the construction site, hand over 10 Sundelions, and watch a short cutscene. That is the entire quest. Madison is established as kind of a generic bubbly child character and has no real personality beyond being generally sweet child and ending a bunch of her words in son. Also, for some fucking reason, she doesn't say lone son here. Are you fucking serious? You say son in every goddamn word, but this one's normal? Are you... I get the sense that this is supposed to be one of their better developed side quests too, which is even more depressing because I did it in its entirety in like 5 minutes. If you don't have 10 Sundelions, there's some work involved in going and collecting them, but that task isn't related to these characters in any way and just amounts to more busy work. This quest also showcases another issue with the game that is so common that it became more and more distracting as time went by, and that is the game's reliance on fading to black. Throughout this quest, rather than seamlessly animating characters moving from place to place, the game will fade to black. There are 2 particularly egregious examples of this just in this quest alone. The first is here, where you put something in front of this guy's face to obstruct his vision, talk to Madison, fade to black, she runs onto the platform, fade to black again. Then, a bit later you talk to Hudson to give him the Sundelions, fade to black. Ronson comes over to tell him it's time for Madison to go to Gerudo Town, and rather than showing her walk on screen, it smash cuts to her face, fades to black, and then resumes with her standing by Link and the others. This feels so cheap and lazy, and if me complaining about this feels like nitpicking, please understand that the game does this constantly. I don't understand why they couldn't have pre-rendered a few more of these sequences, especially this one at the end in the hot air balloon. This is clearly supposed to be an emotional climax of sorts, but this quest does not do enough to make me care about these characters. I've known them for like 5 minutes. This is not impactful. I'm more distracted by how sloppy everything here is. It's hard not to raise an eyebrow when Ronson scolds Madison for making a ruckus when she's literally just standing there, for example. Side quests used to be one of the major highlights of Zelda games, but the Switch Zelda games are much weaker, especially Tears of the Kingdom. I'm serious when I say that Breath of the Wild is not much better, but Breath of the Wild was not built on top of another game's engine, with 6 years to develop characters and make them better, and to give us better rewards. My main point is that none of these new quests are fun, and none of them give you any sort of meaningful reward for completing them. Tears of the Kingdom is the first game to make me feel bored and overwhelmed at the same time. There's so much to do in this world, and absolutely none of it matters. As a disclaimer, I'm not someone who really cares about the combat in these games. I like picking mushrooms and solving puzzles. I like riding on the dragons and cooking my silly little meals. I don't have anything to contribute to the conversation about combat, especially because Joseph Anderson broke down how Breath of the Wild's combat worked basically flawlessly, and Tears of the Kingdom works exactly the same way. Flurry Rush is still broken, there's still no reason to parry, armor still completely breaks the balancing, it's all exactly the same as it was in Breath of the Wild. The only difference is that most weapons are decayed now, and Fuse makes defeating monsters somewhat more rewarding than it was in Breath of the Wild, because you can use those monster parts to upgrade your weapons. The only problem is... I'm not someone who even had a problem with the weapons breaking in Breath of the Wild. I thought it was fun and satisfying to break weapons over an enemy's head, and it led to some unique situations where you had to improvise. But people are talking about this game like it fixed Breath of the Wild's issues, and like, no, it didn't. First of all, unfused weapons are more brittle than ever because they're all decayed as a result of the upheaval, and fused weapons still break in a matter of minutes, except this time you feel like you're wasting the weapon and whatever resource you fused to it. This is even worse when you take the pristine versions of weapons into account. The ones found in the depths? I briefly mentioned this earlier, but the only way to make pristine weapons spawn in the depths is to break the decayed version above ground, but only a decayed version that you haven't fused with anything. Nothing in the game ever so much as suggests that this is how it works. And the game has been training you since you got Fuse on the Great Sky Island to attach materials to all of your weapons to make them stronger. I don't know how anyone is ever supposed to figure this out without looking it up. The same is true of these rock Octoroks. If you drop a weapon, shield, or bow in front of these guys, they'll suck it up and repair it, resetting its durability and even adding some sort of stat boost. This is a cool feature, and being able to restore weapons is something many people were clamoring for, but again, how are you supposed to know how to do this? The last thing I want to mention on the topic of combat in these games is enemy variety. Breath of the Wild was rightfully criticized for having by far the smallest group of enemies to fight in the entire series, including the first game ever in 1986, when Zelda looked like this. This game had a wider variety of enemies than Breath of the Wild did, and unfortunately it has more than Tears of the Kingdom too. Overwhelmingly, you'll be fighting the same Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos that you fought in Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom likes to pretend it introduced a whole bunch of new enemies, but if you look at the actual list, it's not as great as the game would like you to think. In terms of regular enemies, Tears of the Kingdom added Horriblins, Arakudas, Evermeans, Soldier Constructs, Captain Constructs, Like-Likes, Gibdos, and Little Frogs. That's only 8, and I'm being generous by counting the Captain and Soldier Constructs separately because they're basically the same thing, except the Captain Constructs have more health. Within that list, Arakudas can look cool at first, but they only have 2 hit points, and this is the Zelda game that introduced lock-on for your bow and arrow, so they never actually pose a threat. Evermeans are literally just what-if trees, but evil, which, don't get me wrong, is fucking hilarious, but they're not much of a threat. The Constructs are fine, but you'll mostly be fighting them in shrines or in the sky, and, like their Ranger counterparts, they very rarely interact with the world in any sort of interesting way. Horriblins are a much-needed breath of fresh air, but they're no more interesting than any of the other main enemy types you'll be encountering over and over again, and you only really see them in caves. Gibdos are a cool addition. They don't look anything like they did in the N64 days, but that's not really important. They're only found in the Gerudo region though, so they aren't often enemies you'll actually run into. This is not even doubling the enemy count from Breath of the Wild, and even if you doubled that number of enemies, you'd still have fewer types of enemies than Zelda 1. Mini-bosses didn't fare much better. There's the boss Bokoblin, which is literally just what if Bokoblin but big. There's the Battle Talus, which is just a regular stone talus cosplaying as an enemy camp. There's the Flux Constructs, but as I mentioned during the Shrine section, those are used and reused so many times that you will get sick of fighting them. The Gleeoks are plenty intimidating, and they've got the firepower to back their appearance up. They're fun fights, and while it's unfortunate that you can just infinitely stun-lock them with arrows, you still have to avoid their attacks for long enough to fire off those arrows in the first place. I like these guys. They're pretty neat. More of these, please. The Phrox, on the other hand, is sort of like a mix between a Talus and a Hinox. Hinox? I don't fucking know. But somehow even less fun or interesting. Aside from the shock value of encountering one in the darkness of the depths for the first time, they don't have much to offer. And speaking of shock value, all that's left to discuss is the Gloomspawn. These Nightmare Hands are sort of a successor to the Guardians, in the sense that the devs wanted an enemy that makes you shit your pants and run away every time you see it. They're definitely scary in the beginning of the game, and visually they're much more overtly creepy looking than the Guardians. The Guardians were more unsettling. This is horrifying. But even having said that, I'm sorry, it's not even close. That initial piano when a Guardian spots you is going to be burned into our collective psyche for years to come. The Gloomspawn theme is freaky, using those reverse voice samples that Tears of the Kingdom loves so much, but it's nowhere near as iconic. And the Gloomspawn as an enemy is nowhere near as threatening as a Guardian was. A Guardian could see you from a mile away, and it would not stop until it had mowed you down with its big fuck-off laser. Gloomspawn can't swim, they can't climb walls or trees, and they don't have any ranged attacks. So you can just run to somewhere where they can't get to you, and they'll get frustrated and disappear. Good luck outrunning a Guardian. The Gloom Hands also have a pretty long animation when they first spawn in, and then they notice Link, which gives plenty of time to see them and either figure out somewhere to escape, or a plan for combat, or to just teleport away. The Gloomspawn doesn't have the same element of surprise as the Guardians, and they're so clearly... See? I got you, didn't I? The Gloomspawn are so clearly trying to be the next big thing, and it's just kind of sad. Their lack of ranged options combined with their extreme weakness to bombs means that the best option will always be to just run away and then throw bombs at them. There's never a question of how you're going to fight them because you don't want them to get close enough to you that they can grab you and drain your health. After you defeat them, Phantom Ganon shows up, and he's even more of a pushover than the Hands. He's just a standard duel with someone else in your weight class, and if you've got the Master Sword, it's very easy to make quick work of him. It's always more frustrating than intimidating when the Hands show up, because now you're in for a 2-phase mini-boss fight that's interrupting whatever you were doing before. So, good first impression, but it's diminished significantly by your 10th hour, let alone your 100th. See? Every time. But enough of combat, enough of disappointing dungeons and subpar side quests and shrines. It's time to get into the real train wreck. Let's talk about the story.
Link, this edible ain't
Look, I understand how someone could enjoy or defend this game as a whole. Despite its myriad flaws, it's fun to mess around in this Hyrule-sized sandbox and build your silly little cars. But there can be no defending the story of Tears of the Kingdom. The story in this game is utter dog shit, and the section's going to be long because I intend to back that up. If you thought the shrine section was extensive, you haven't seen shit. Before I put the tear in Tears of the Kingdom and rip this story to shreds, I want to briefly touch on the voice acting in this game. Breath of the Wild was the first Zelda game to feature voice acting, and much like in Breath of the Wild, the English voices in this game suck. I understand there's only so much a talented voice actor can do with the script they're given, but the lack of emotion or personality from anyone in this game besides maybe Rauru or Sonia is staggering. I know people really like Matt Mercer, like as a person, and he does a fine job, but I don't know if casting him as Ganondorf was the right move. He doesn't sound like some intimidating king of evil. He sounds like Matt Mercer. I played this game with the Japanese voices, and it went a long way towards making the cutscenes tolerable to sit through, especially as it pertains to a certain rock boy.
Goro!
The Japanese voice actors do a phenomenal job, even if they can't save this game from its own script. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be using clips from the English dub, because this video's in English, and I know people are going to be listening to this and not necessarily watching it, but I experienced these scenes for the first time in Japanese. I will say that Breath of the Wild had some major discrepancies between its original Japanese script and the English localization, but Tears of the Kingdom's English script seems to be mostly faithful to the original, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Let's start by talking about the main story content here, the memories. Almost all of the cutscenes in Breath of the Wild were set in the past, 100 years prior to the events of the game. They mostly showed Link interacting with the other champions, and especially with Zelda. I say interacting, but Link's a silent protagonist, so he's given a disappointingly small amount of characterization beyond simple body language. You unlocked these cutscenes by looking at pictures that Zelda took using her Sheikah Slate 100 years ago. Then it's up to you to figure out where the picture was taken and go there. Since Link was present for these moments, returning to the place where they happened causes him to suddenly remember a part of his past. There are 12 pictures plus a 13th bonus one once you found the others, and they can be viewed in pretty much any order. The story here is hurt more by how far removed it is from the actual events of the game than it's hurt by the non-linear method of discovery. We already know all these characters are gonna die. The memory cutscenes are there to flesh out their personalities more than anything else. The memories don't have much bearing on the story of the game, but they don't really have to. The same cannot be said of Tears of the Kingdom. For some unfathomable reason, Tears of the Kingdom also has memories that you travel the world in search of. This time, they're found within these massive pictures that have appeared across Hyrule called geoglyphs. When Link walks up to one of these tiers, his hand will glow and he'll see a memory of Zelda in the past. You can encounter these glyphs at any time, and while there is a canon order to the memories, you can still find them out of order. This is a problem in a way that it wasn't in Breath of the Wild because Tears of the Kingdom is trying to tell a linear story. Breath of the Wild was able to get away with it because Link was an amnesiac, and the events of his past were already a foregone conclusion. You know what happened 100 years ago. There's not a mystery you're trying to solve here. It's more about understanding Zelda and the other champions, and I guess Link, but he's not really a character. He just kind of looks sexy in gender. But in Tears of the Kingdom, figuring out where Zelda is and what happened to her is the whole point. So it's not unreasonable for players to seek out these memories as soon as they can, and that's never difficult because they're so easy to see from the sky. Early in my first playthrough, when I was making my way to Rito Village, I found a memory that opens on a shot of a major character lying dead on the ground. This instantly spoiled that she was going to die, and it cast a long shadow over the rest of the memories she appeared in. Just so we're all on the same page, let's go through the story of this game as told by the memories, and then I can break down what exactly went so wrong here. Zelda poofs into existence sometime in the distant past, just as Rauru and Sonia are conveniently taking a stroll in that exact spot. They introduce themselves, and Zelda realizes she's been transported back in time. Rauru tells Zelda that Sonia's secret stone was what allowed her to travel back in time, and Sonia says that she can sense a blood connection between them. Zelda says that something terrible's happening in her time and she needs to get back there as soon as possible. Rauru suggests they go meet with his sister Minoru. Minoru is staring at Zelda's iPhone, and she asks if she can tinker with it for a little bit, so she can activate its warp feature. She tells Zelda that she can sense both Raru's light power and Sonia's time power within her, and tells her that while secret stones amplify the user's power, they don't give them access to any new abilities. If Zelda doesn't know how she went back in time, she won't be able to go forward either. Minoru then tells Zelda that if she swallows a secret stone, she'll turn into an immortal dragon, ensuring that she'll still be alive in the future, but it will come at the cost of her consciousness, her personality, basically her entire self. Minoru also mentions that this is forbidden, so it's not gonna work anyway. Back to the drawing board. The next memory opens with Ganondorf staring out across the Great Plateau. He says,
Hyrule will bow down before me.
before signaling one of his soldiers to blow on some sort of weird instrument that summons a horde of desert monsters called Moldugas. Rauru, Zelda, and Sonia rush to the scene, and then Rauru blasts them all away using his magical secret stone. With his plans foiled, Ganondorf is newly determined to get a secret stone for himself. Ganondorf's now in the throne room, swearing fealty to Rauru, eyeing up the secret stones, and making some thinly veiled threats while he's at it. He also shows off the world's most evil smile for anyone who wasn't sure if this guy was supposed to be the villain. After he leaves, Zelda says, "Hey, this Ganondorf guy seems kinda suspicious," and then Rauru says, "Yeah, I know he's super evil, but I'm keeping a close eye on him, so it's fine." Zelda and Sonia are hanging out in the garden and talking about how Zelda wants to go home and has a huge crush on Link. Sonia reiterates that Zelda has power over time, but also a sacred power that can dispel evil. Rauru and Sonia both talk about how they'd like to meet Link someday. Sonia and Zelda are alone as Zelda supposedly requested. This obviously suspicious Zelda immediately pulls a knife on Sonia, only for the real Zelda to be like, "Haha, you thought you could fool us." But then Ganondorf appears behind Sonia and literally just punches her to death. Sonia falls to the ground, Zelda freaks out, and Ganondorf does a silly face. Zelda's begging Sonia to wake up, but she wasn't sleeping, so it doesn't work. Ganondorf goes Secret Stone Demon King and summons a bunch of monsters all over Hyrule. Rauru finally shows up and then immediately tries to 1v1 Ganondorf. He's outmatched, and then Zelda uses her iPhone to transport them away. Not too long after that, we learn that Ganondorf is taking over the entire kingdom, so in order to fight him, Rauru gives the sages their secret stones. Rauru is standing over Sonia's grave and looking sad. Zelda shows up and tells Rauru that she knows they're going to lose to Ganondorf because he's still alive in the future. She tells Rauru that he's going to die sealing Ganondorf, and Rauru's like, "Yeah, probably." He tells Zelda that there has to be a reason she was sent back in time, and then he walks away, leaving her to think about it. Zelda's standing in the Temple of Time after the battle looking sad, and says out loud that they were able to seal Ganondorf away, but that she's not sure Link will be able to stop him. The Master Sword pops out of that portal it went into at the beginning of the game, tells her that the batteries in her Wii Remote are nearly depleted. Zelda realizes there is something she can do to help Link, and she says that she'll be forever changed. At this point, you've found all the geoglyphs. The Light Dragon will appear in the sky and shed one final tear. In this memory, we see Zelda swallow her secret stone and turn into the Light Dragon that's been flying around Hyrule for the entire game. We now know both where Zelda is and what happened to her. Link goes and pulls the sword out of Zelda's head and sees one final scene of her holding the sword and urging Link to use it to defeat Ganondorf. I could go through these events in a super organized manner to make sure I talk about all of the flaws in just the right order, but Tears of the Kingdom can get away with just splintering its content into bite-sized pieces, so I can too. $70, please. Here is a non-comprehensive list of the issues with Tears of the Kingdom's memories. Some of these will be closer to nitpicks and some will be more serious continuity or storytelling issues, but I just need to get this off my chest, okay? I've been thinking about this stupid fucking story for way too long. Let me have this, please. So you're telling me that Zelda appears just as Rauru and Sonia are walking by? If Rauru and Sonia are Zelda's distant ancestors, like Sonia implies, where is their child? They're both dead by the time the memories wrap up, and we never hear about them having a kid, but their bloodline has to continue somehow, right? I wondered if maybe Minoru could have been Zelda's ancestor, but she's been hanging out in the Purapad the whole time, so that doesn't feel likely either. Why is Sonia the one with the time power? In Breath of the Wild, Zelda struggled to unlock her powers because her mother, who is supposed to teach her, passed away. Zelda confirms that her mother learned from her mother, implying that this light power is matrilineal, but Rauru's the one with the light power here. This makes even less sense when you consider that Rauru's a Zonai and has no connection to the goddess Hylia, so it would have to have been Sonia who passed down the light power. If the secret stones can't give you powers that you don't already know how to use, how in the hell did Zelda end up in the past in the first place? Why are the shrines in this cutscene placed where the shrines were in Breath of the Wild as opposed to where they actually are in Tears of the Kingdom? Did they move at some point? Is this supposed to be an Easter egg, or are we meant to take this at face value? So wait, Sonia does have light powers? I have no idea how Ganondorf supposedly sees this itty-bitty secret stone from this far away. Why are Rauru and Minoru the only Zonai left? How does Ganondorf know this? When exactly do these memories take place? Is the situation with the Zonai disappearing like common knowledge? Or Zelda had her father and all of her friends, not to mention a good chunk of her subjects, ruthlessly slaughtered by Calamity Ganon, an entity that she knows reincarnates throughout time. She says this to Link at the end of Breath of the Wild. The fact that she can't put her finger on why Ganondorf seems suspicious is a fucking joke. He literally has Ganon in his name. Rauru is a dumbass, but also Zelda's a dumbass. She waits until after Ganondorf has killed Sonia and transformed into the Demon King to think to tell Rauru that she found Ganondorf in the basement in the future. He's still alive. Whatever he's about to do is not going to work. This Zelda is supposed to be smart. That's like her main character trait. This whole conversation they have in the garden teaches us absolutely nothing new about this world or its characters, and its inclusion just makes me more aware of how many chances Zelda had to say something about Ganondorf and didn't. If she wanted to help Rauru and Sonia so badly, why won't she tell them this crucial piece of information? Ganondorf has this massive samurai sword in Memories 4 and 5, but I guess he doesn't need it because he kills Sonia by just straight up punching her. If Zelda and Sonia knew this was a setup, why didn't they loop Rauru in? He doesn't show up until after Ganondorf is already transformed into the Demon King, and something tells me it may have been useful to have him around. This stupid fucking face deflates whatever tension existed in this moment. I am 100% sure that the reason this is in the game is so that people could make memes. It's for the memes. We hear about Ganondorf's conquest, but we never really see it. We get a few seconds of it in a cutscene near the end of the game, but this is a lot of tell and almost no show. Zelda still doesn't say anything about Ganondorf surviving this upcoming battle. Hold on, where's the goddess statue? Is this scene meant to suggest that the Forgotten Temple was built to guard the secret stones? And if the secret stones were stored in the Forgotten Temple, then who put the goddess statue there? What the fuck is going on? Who built the Geoglyph room? And why? And when? And how would they know? It's so fucking video gamey. This room exists to show you where the cutscenes are and what order to see them in, but there's no conceivable reason that the people of Hyrule would have built this room into the fucking Forgotten Temple. It just sucks. It's so dog shit. The sages all swear loyalty to Rauru, but like, isn't he already their king? What is the point of this scene? We already know these guys get the secret stones. It's the only thing we know about the ancient sages. And instead of developing them in literally any capacity, we just see them get their secret stones, something we already know to have happened. This memory opens on a shot of Sonia's grave, another delightful surprise for the poor fuckers watching these memories out of order. Zelda finally tells Rauru about Ganondorf still being alive in the future, and Rauru's like, it'll probably be fine, despite that attitude being the exact same one that got his wife killed a handful of scenes ago. I don't have a criticism here. This scene goes fucking crazy. This is Kino. This is everything. This goes hard. I have no notes. I do have a criticism here though. If the sages saw Zelda turn into the Light Dragon, why don't they fucking tell Link that when they meet with him in the Secret Stone Demon King cutscenes? Zelda tells them about Link and they know that Link needs the Master Sword to defeat Ganon, so they should really be telling him where to find it. Link has zero reaction to seeing his dragon girlfriend sacrifice herself to give him a fighting chance against Ganondorf. All this work, and the Master Sword is less powerful than it was in Breath of the Wild, and it still breaks in a matter of minutes. Whew. That felt good. We're not done yet, don't worry. The biggest problem with this story is that it changes absolutely nothing about the game. As I've said several times already, the main goal of this game is to figure out where Zelda is and what happened to her. And by the time you've seen all of the memories, you've learned two very important things. The first and most obvious is that Zelda is the Light Dragon. The second thing we learn is in that memory where Ganondorf makes the face. We know with 100% certainty that Ganondorf can create a fake Zelda to do his bidding, and that knowledge, combined with the knowledge that Zelda's currently in the sky being a wiggly worm, makes playing through the main story of this game agonizing. You will have to go to these dungeons and see fake Zelda doing her thing, listen to your party members wonder aloud why Zelda's acting so weird, and like, we know why. You can be carrying the Master Sword that you literally pulled out of Zelda's head, and at no point does Link go, hey, by the way, Zelda's a dragon right now, this weird fake Zelda's an imposter. The only person you can tell about Zelda's fate is Impa, who will just say something to the effect of, damn, that sucks, and then she fucks off for the rest of the game. If you waited until after the first 4 temples to do the Dragon Tears quest, this is pretty annoying. But if you saw all the memories before you finished the first 4 dungeons, it's absolutely infuriating. We see Link tell people when he's already completed a quest, or collected however many apples or whatever, but he can't fucking tell Yunobo that the Zelda they're chasing is obviously fake. This wouldn't even have to be a big rewrite of the story either. Just have the companions go, hey, get back here, Ganondorf, I know you're not really Zelda, and nothing else has to change. It would be better than nothing, but unfortunately we have been served nothing on a silver platter for the low price of 70 United States dollars. You know what's conspicuously missing from these memory cutscenes? The Sky Islands. The memories don't even mention them, or the depths for that matter, at any point. The game makes no effort to work them into the story in the present either, and it just feels so video gamey. We hear that these chasms that lead to the depths opened up during the upheaval, but the depths are full of light roots, mines, forges, Zonai devices, and even constructs. We know from the stone tablets that Mineru's the one who originally built the constructs, and we also know that her soul is inside the Purapad from the time of Zelda's transformation to when Link arrives at the Spirit Temple, which means that Minoru must have built the construct factory before the events of the memories take place. But when? If the Zonai came from the sky, what's all their stuff doing underground? It's the same situation for the temples in general, actually. Who built them? Why? The answer seems to be that they were created so the sages would have somewhere to keep their secret stones safe, but the sages only received their secret stones in the first place after Ganondorf had begun his conquest. You're telling me that every single village in the Gerudo Desert had fallen, but they still had time to build the Lightning Temple, complete with all of its light puzzles and booby traps? No. The real answer is that the temples were created so you, the player, could explore them. And then there's the amiibo stuff in the depths. All of these pieces of armor or weapons are stored in these Zonai treasure chests that Link needs to use his Rauru arm to open, and all of them are items from previous Zelda games. It's so crazy to me that people act like this game is a love letter to longtime fans, when they have the fused shadow or Majora's goddamn mask just hanging out down here with zero explanation. Are we supposed to take this at face value? In Breath of the Wild, they were dropped into the world unceremoniously as gifts from amiibos. Nothing suggested that they were canon to this world, but now you've got the fucking Trousers of Time just hanging out down here in hell. In contention for the most confusing thing down here, the Hero of the Wild set that you obtain after completing all the shrines in Breath of the Wild is also down here. Why? We need to move on before I explode into tiny pieces like that one Game Over screen in Bubsy 3D. There is no reason for the story of this game to take place entirely in the past. The only reason they did it like this is because it's how Breath of the Wild did it. It weakened the story there, but it completely torpedoes it here, especially because of the effect it has on Link and, by extension, the player's relationship with the cast of characters. Let's talk about Zelda first. From the very first teaser back in 2019, Zelda was looking to be playing a much more active role, adventuring underground right alongside Link. People even speculated that you'd be able to play as Zelda in the new game, a prospect that makes my heart hurt when I think about it too hard. Unfortunately, the only time you get to interact with Zelda is during the opening, after which she falls into a hole and teleports into the past. Bye, Zelda. This sucks. Like, on a number of levels. This incarnation of Zelda was smart, compelling, and capable in Breath of the Wild. In this game, we hear about her building a school in Hateno Village. We see memorials she's left around the world dedicated to the soldiers who fell during the calamity. Everyone we talk to who knows her loves her. We get the sense that she's a really integral part of Hyrule, so having her gone for the entirety of the game's runtime is such a tremendous missed opportunity. Zelda being absent from this game also means that there can be no continuity between her story in Breath of the Wild and her story in Tears of the Kingdom. How does she feel about her father's death now that she's out of crisis mode and has time to process it? How does she deal with the responsibility placed on her shoulders at such a young age? What was her role in rebuilding Hyrule in the years between the games? The answer, once again, is that there isn't an answer, because instead of having Zelda play any part in the game's story in the present, we're stuck watching her fuck around in the past. I'm sorry, this is not my Zelda. If this Zelda got sent back in time to the era of Hyrule's founding, she would have been cooped up in Minoru's library 24/7, and you cannot change my mind. Reducing her to a swooning damsel who can only think about her knight in shining armor feels like such a step backwards from the level of agency Zelda had in Breath of the Wild. That's not even mentioning the literal death of self she undergoes when she turns into the Light Dragon. Even minor character building moments like having her nerd out over the constructs would have gone a tremendously long way towards making this Zelda feel like a person and not just a plot device. And speaking of characters who are just plot devices, I've seen a lot of people say that this incarnation of Ganondorf is great, and I've got to ask, what the fuck are you talking about? This has got to be the worst Ganondorf in the series by far. Even Twilight Princess's Ganondorf, while infamously shoehorned in at the end, still commanded a presence and made things personal with Link on some level. He was still a villain that felt satisfying to defeat even if he wasn't around for most of the game. Tears of the Kingdom Ganondorf, on the other hand, is a nothing character. What are his motivations? What does he want? Why is he like this? The answer this game gives is a resounding who cares. Ganondorf gets just over 700 words worth of dialogue in the entire game, and I'm counting fake Zelda, so that's a generous estimate. We know he likes power, he wants to, control Hyrule, but it's not at all clear why. As Rauru says, he's already the king of the Gerudo. We get the sense that he has some sort of beef with the Zonai just based on the throne room scene, but that's never gone into. Worst of all, he has no relationship with Link or even Zelda, really. The only reason he knows who Link is because Rauru talks about him in the last moments before they're sealed away. And every time he talks to Link, it's related to Rauru. Like,
Rauru placed his faith in you.
Or,
it seems there is more to you than the power Rauru has gifted.
It doesn't feel satisfying to defeat him because he hasn't established any sort of relationship with the playable character, let alone the player. It's even less clear what he wants in the present. If his goal was to rule over Hyrule, why is he hanging out under the castle for the whole game? Remember in Ocarina of Time how Hyrule Castle got an extreme Ganon makeover? There's nothing even close to that here. For all the talk of the Demon King, he isn't doing anything remotely king-like. He even says before the final battle that he will rule because
that is what a king must do.
but he's been down in the basement for the entire game. What has he been doing? He sent the Blizzard to the Rito, the Sludge to the Zora, the Gibdos to the Gerudo, and drugs to the Gorons, but why? The sages all say it was to prevent their descendants from obtaining the secret stones, but it's not like you need the secret stones to defeat him anyway. Honestly, drawing massive attention to the 4 temples by putting monsters in there that threaten the people living nearby has got to be the worst way of keeping the stones hidden. Link doesn't go to any of these places to get the secret stones. He's going there because the people of Hyrule are suffering. He's also supposed to be looking for Zelda, who Ganondorf keeps using as bait to lure Link to the exact places he doesn't want him snooping around in. And again, it doesn't even really make a difference since it's entirely possible to take on Ganondorf as soon as you're off the Great Sky Island and nothing changes. No secret stones required. Honestly, it seems to me like the secret stones in general are pretty much useless. They didn't help the sages in the past, they aren't necessary in the present. The biggest impact they have is when people eat them, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, what in the hell is going on in this scene? Ganondorf as fake Zelda shows Link a vision of Hyrule Castle pre-Calamity, and asks if it brings back memories. Ignoring the question of how on earth he's even able to show Link this vision in the first place, why does he know what century-old Hyrule Castle looks like? If you go down to the foundation of the castle, you can read a stone tablet explaining that Hyrule Castle was built on top of the imprisoning chamber after Rauru sealed Ganondorf away. So I have absolutely no clue how he could know what Hyrule Castle used to look like unless he was somehow conscious as Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, which he obviously wasn't. Calamity Ganon is mindless hatred made manifest. He has no dialogue or characterization whatsoever. That's the whole point of having him just be an angry pig cloud. In light of Tears of the Kingdom, knowing Ganondorf was under Hyrule Castle the whole time, what am I supposed to make of Calamity Ganon? I would guess that Calamity Ganon was just a creation made of Ganondorf's malice, but Ganondorf is only ever associated with gloom in this game, so I'm kind of at a loss. If someone has any idea about how this is supposed to work, comment it below because this has me stumped. But if you need to write fanfiction in a YouTube comment to explain the basic mechanics of how this game's villain works, then the game is not well written. I don't expect there to be continuity between Zelda games in general, but if you're making a direct sequel, and one that takes place less than 10 years later, no less, there needs to be some effort to create cohesion in the narrative. Otherwise, why make it a direct sequel in the first place? This feels so careless in how it's set up, and without any plans for DLC, this is just how the story in this game is. Moving on from Ganondorf, we should probably talk about Link. I understand that having him be a silent protagonist is kind of a thing, but even in Ocarina of Time, 26 years ago, he was characterized through body language and facial expressions. Wind Waker had one of the most expressive Links to date, and that expressiveness isn't confined to the cartoony art style, because Skyward Sword Link also communicates emotions through his face and body language. We see him banging on the Zelda crystal after her resin project doesn't quite work out. Maybe the real victim of Skyward Sword was Zelda's Etsy shop. But this is a level of emotion that we never see from Tears of the Kingdom Link, or Breath of the Wild Link for that matter. I've heard people say that he's more expressive in Age of Calamity, but I haven't played Age of Calamity. If that's true though, it means Tears of the Kingdom handled their Link worse than a fucking Hyrule Warriors game. I wish I had more to say about Link, but I really don't. He's less than a blank slate. He's barely a character at all. He shows more emotion when he's a little bit chilly than he does when he finds out that his girlfriend is stuck as a dragon forever. I could talk about other characters, but I just don't want to. This video is long enough as it is, and I just don't care about the rest of the cast. If people really want to hear me talk about the other characters in this game, I might consider doing a follow-up, but for now, let's just move on. The last thing I want to discuss about the story of this game is how it ends. You finally take the fight to Ganondorf, but first you have to fight your way through several waves of monsters. Then, all the temple bosses show up at once, but provided you've completed the temples, your sage allies come to the rescue at the 11th hour and tell you to go on ahead. I don't know why they couldn't have been around for the rest of the game, or how they got down here for that matter, but the score in this scene is so good that it makes me emotional in spite of myself. That's basically the final hour of Tears of the Kingdom in a nutshell. It's an explosive ending to an implosive story. The actual fight with Ganondorf is pretty good too, even if the sages, again, don't play nearly as important a role as the game wants you to think they do. And of course, I have to give the game credit where credit is due. The visual gag with the health bar manages to be fucking hilarious without deflating the tension of this moment. Anyway, then Ganondorf is like, "Rah, I can't lose to you, a mere mortal, curses foiled and spoiled, whatever." So he makes the logical decision to swallow his secret stone, which...
What?
Fujibayashi.
You listen to me right now!
If Ganondorf wants to rule Hyrule, chowing down on his fancy rock seems like maybe not the best way to go about that, seeing as it turns you into a mindless dragon categorically incapable of ruling over anyone. Also, he says he'll throw away everything to beat Link, but first of all, why? Is this rivalry of 2 minutes really so intense that it's worth it to undergo total loss of self? And second of all, how does he know what's going to happen when he does swallow the stone? This creates a cool set piece for the final battle, but it makes no sense if you think about it for even a second, and it makes Ganondorf feel like even less of a real character, because his actions here make no sense. Okay, I'm gonna take a short break from complaining for a second to say that this sequence fucking rules. It's not particularly difficult, it's more of a flashy send-off to the game's main story than it is an involved fight, but that doesn't really bother me. The visual of flying through the skies of Hyrule on your dragon girlfriend and beating the shit out of this goofy-looking wiggly worm is everything I've ever wanted, and you know I have to put a word in for the music. You beat Ganondorf and you're transported to this magical pastel void where Rauru and Sonia appear Deus Ex Machina style to turn Zelda back into a human. And they also fix Link's arm while they're at it. Your last bit of gameplay in order to wrap up the main story involves skydiving to catch Zelda, a parallel to the shot at the beginning of the game where she falls into darkness and he just misses her. The main theme combined with the iconic melody of Zelda's lullaby swells in the background, the lighting is gorgeous, Link carries her bridal style out of the pond, she says she felt a loving embrace that finally woke her up after thousands of years. I was crying like a baby the first time I saw all this. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't an impactful sequence, but I'd also be lying if I said it was good. Let's start with the biggest and most glaring problem. Zelda's transformation back into a human. The biggest problem with this biggest problem is that your actions as the player do not affect what happens here at all. Even if you wake up naked on the Great Sky Island and beeline to Ganondorf without even getting your paraglider, you'll still end the game catching a human Zelda as you fall out of the sky together. And this game gives you the Master Sword if you get to the final battle without it, something Breath of the Wild didn't even do. This also means that if you skipped the memory cutscenes and just went directly to Ganondorf after you finished the temples, you'll find out here that Zelda's the Light Dragon, making the whole process of seeking out the memories completely pointless. At an absolute minimum, you should need to have seen the memories in order for Zelda to turn back into a human at the end. An early final boss kill that ends with Link looking sadly up at the sky as Hyrule saved from Ganondorf but has lost its queen, and Link has lost the person who mattered most to him, would be infinitely more powerful than seeing the exact same ending whether you spent 40 minutes playing this game, or 40 hours, or even 400 hours. There is a bonus scene at the end if you've collected all the memories, but it just shows Mineru's spirit moving on and the other sages swearing their loyalty to Zelda, which, again, isn't she already their queen? Haven't they already promised they'd fight by Link's side in accordance with her wishes? This amounts to yet another redundant scene, and I think it actually weakens the scenes that come before it, because now instead of ending on this scene, it ends on a scene that is so thoroughly meh. We need to talk about Link here too. First of all, Link getting his original arm back sucks. Not only is his regular arm a downgrade from the magical Rauru arm by all accounts, it also just feels kinda slimy when a character that's disabled in some way is magically healed at the end. And if you're not compelled by that argument, how about the fact that with Link back to normal, the Master Sword back to normal, and Zelda back to normal, nothing has changed between the beginning of this story and the end of it. It was truly pointless from start to finish, and that's a crying shame since it had an ending that was as excellent as it was undeserved. I've also seen this video from Mistress Light on Tumblr that shows Link smiling at Zelda after she's returned to her human form, and the fact that they make this perpetually straight-faced character who doesn't react to anything in the entire game show some genuine emotion for the first and only time off camera where the player will not see it is such a fucking crazy decision that I do not even know where to begin to unpack it. It's me during the editing process again. I think another problem is that Zelda did not suffer. When she woke up from dragon mode, she just thought she'd been asleep the whole time. She was just vibing for thousands of years. Zelda swallowing the secret stone is treated as this big climactic sacrificial moment, and like, the scene where it happens is really well done, but she didn't suffer. There is no actual cost to her doing this. On the contrary, it's getting her back to exactly where she wants to be, which is with Link. I think the far bigger tragedy is that Zelda has now lost a second set of parents. But we, don't see her get sad about it. The story is carried hard by its music and visuals, because I don't care about these characters at all. And they had a head start. I already cared about this Zelda. Alright, addendum over, back to past me. Tears of the Kingdom story is a shit show, even when compared to the other lackluster elements of the game's presentation. The characters are morons, the villain gets not even 3 pages of total dialogue, and the only consequential act in the story, Zelda's sacrifice, is undone at the end. For all the flack Breath of the Wild story got for taking place 100 years in the past with characters that were all dead by the time the game starts, at least those characters were likable and memorable, and we got to see Link interact with them. Even if you didn't like them, at least they had names. Everything about Tears of the Kingdom story, from its delivery method to its writing to its internal consistency, is shoddy, underdeveloped, and insulting. Even the great ending sequence is undercut by the shittiness of everything that came before it. The nonsensical motivation for Ganondorf's transformation into the demon dragon, Zelda automatically turning back into a human, Link's lack of emotion, the list goes on and on and on. They learned absolutely nothing from Breath of the Wild's mistakes, and as a result they created a story that feels cheap, falls apart under scrutiny, and that will be remembered in the future not for its emotional impact, but for
Sacred Stone? Demon King?
Hey, also, before I forget, what the fuck is going on with the Ancient Heroes aspect? What is this thing? When you finish all 152 shrines, mysterious voice number 957 instructs you to go back to the Temple of Time on the Great Sky Island to receive your reward. And it's this? What am I looking at, Nintendo? What am I looking at? Who made this and why? If you talk to Impa while wearing this outfit, she says that you look like the hero from the Calamity? The fucking Calamity that you haven't mentioned in this entire goddamn game? Am I supposed to believe that this fucking weird green furry has story significance? How do I even begin to parse this? I can't. I won't. This is a nightmare. I hate this. Also, it's ugly. Also, what the fuck? This is completely incoherent rambling, because what is this and why is it in my Zelda game? They are never going to elaborate on this. They are done with the Wild Era. They dropped this at the end of Tears of the Kingdom and said, okay, bye. Have fun trying to figure out what this fucking thing is. Okay, smarty pants, I hear you say. If Tears of the Kingdom is so bad, how would you do it better? And as far as I'm concerned, there are 3 ways to answer that question. First, there are small changes I would make to the game that Nintendo actually shipped, Tears of the Kingdom as we all know it. These are the most realistic and would not dramatically change the structure or setup of the game, but they would improve it in various ways. Then there are the bigger changes I would make to aspects of the game that are more deeply entrenched and that would require a more significant overhaul. Finally, there's a total upheaval, so to speak, basically throwing the whole game away and imagining an ideal sequel to Breath of the Wild from scratch. I'm gonna talk about the first 2 here because the third is a much longer conversation that isn't really related to this video. Let me know if you want to see my reimagining of the sequel, I guess. I also want to preemptively remind you all that I'm not a game designer, I'm not a programmer, or whatever. I'm a little stuffed animal with opinions. Let's go over small changes first. I'll list these off rapid fire and in no particular order. Ready? Go! Items can now be fused with weapons directly from the menu. The ability to pick up rupees by just running into them is restored from Breath of the Wild. I don't know why they changed this in the first place. You can now mark favorites in the materials menu to make searching for things less tedious. In a similar vein, you can designate certain materials to act as arrow types, allowing you to use the same type of arrow over and over again without having to stop and fuse every time. The scope and the camera are now integrated. You can zoom in and out on the scope and easily take pictures without having to switch abilities. Similarly, auto build is now part of Ultra Hand. Just press Y while it's active to open the auto build menu. And speaking of auto build, it will now prompt you to use Zonai devices or materials from your inventory if you have them, and you can easily toggle between using inventory materials and using Zonite. Paraglider fabrics can now be changed in the menu. The intro cutscene is now skippable. When selecting an article of clothing, you'll be prompted to wear the full set if you've got it. Great Fairies now let you upgrade your clothes by multiple stages at once if you have all the materials you need. And the materials that you need to upgrade your armor will now be visible in the menu. D-pad down, the button that makes Link whistle in the base game, will now bring up a radial menu where you can easily activate and deactivate sages, as well as call your horse from any distance. Tapping the D-pad could also be how you activate sage abilities to avoid those situations where you accidentally activate Tulin and he blows your valuables off the Sky Island and into the void. The ability to climb waterfalls is now given to Link as a toggle in the key items menu, similar to the Earthquake scroll, so you can use that ability without needing to switch the outfit you're wearing to the Zora armor, climb the waterfall, and then switch back. Minoru will be buffed significantly. She'll walk faster, her attacks will do more damage, and her weapons will break a bit slower. Speaking of weapons breaking, weapon durability is finally visible in the menu, and Yunobo will tell you about the Rock Octorok trick, so all players will know that that's an option. The ability to bomb the targets in the shrines will be removed, and ideally, you won't be able to bring materials with you into any shrine, not just the Proving Grounds. Cave Blessings are replaced with harder content similar to the Blue Flame or Trial of Power shrines from Breath of the Wild. There will also be a new Sudden Death type shrine where Link is reduced to to a quarter heart, similar to the Obliterator challenge from the Breath of the Wild DLC. The delay when using the quick menu is removed, and the ability to scroll through with the R, L, ZL, and ZR buttons is restored. Holding A on an item in the menu will allow you to drag and drop it, allowing you to manually sort your inventory. You can find blank schema stones in the depths, effectively letting you upgrade the number of favorites you can store in auto-build, as well as giving your builds names. Sleeping in the Melania bed will now let you talk to him to upgrade your horses from any stable. The final boss will no longer automatically give you the Master Sword, and defeating the Demon Dragon without viewing all the memories will result in a bad ending, where Ganondorf is defeated but Zelda remains a dragon. This is not an exhaustive list, and hopefully these changes are not controversial. I don't think anyone would realistically complain about having more, better content on top of the game as it is. Having said that, let's talk about some more substantial changes I'd make. Without completely rewriting the story, I think at the very least it would make sense to show Zelda working with Minoru to develop the Zonai tech, using Zelda's knowledge of the Sheikah tech. That would explain why the Zonai champions all wear armor reminiscent of the Divine Beasts. It was directly inspired by the Divine Beasts. The shrines, likewise, would have been built by Zelda in the past to help Link in the future, because Zelda has seen that already in Breath of the Wild. This would also explain why the Sheikah tech doesn't exist in Tears of the Kingdom. With Zelda using her knowledge of the Sheikah tech to design the Zonai tech, the Sheikah tech would never be invented in this timeline. This is also super in character for this Zelda, and it would add some much needed continuity back into the story. Speaking of story, this game would benefit from being a little less Castle in the Sky and a little more Nausicaa. Imagine the reveal that the Zonai originally came from the depths. Maybe the depths were originally a lush subterranean world, but the Zonai's technology drained it of its natural resources and left it in the state that we see it in. That would explain why there's nothing of substance in the sky and why there's random Zonai stuff all around the depths. Say that the Zonai created the Sky Islands as an alibi to hide the truth of their past. There's nothing up there because it's all just for show. Alternatively, just get rid of the depths. Get rid of them. Put way more stuff in the sky, and have the subterranean layer show you a map of the caves that you fill out by exploring them. Back to the Zonai tech, the addition of a dedicated menu for building Zonai devices, or some sort of garage, would go a long way towards making building less janky. Even Kingdom Hearts had this one figured out, and that game's older than me. I'd also implement the Zonai devices a little bit differently. In order to gain access to the portable capsules containing specific devices, you'd need to clear the respective device tutorial shrine. This would add a sense of progression that's sorely missing from Tears of the Kingdom, and the shrines would feel almost like mini-dungeons from the Zelda games of old that reward you with a cool new item to use in the overworld. Ideally, these shrines would be visually distinct in some way, so that players who want to beeline for the devices can do that. You could also make it so that players need to have unlocked certain devices in order to access certain shrines, allowing for more difficult puzzles because you can be sure players will be familiar with how the devices work, and you can start building more complex challenges on top of that. You could still use these shrines as warp points, and it would give you something to look forward to and keep in mind for later. Speaking of incentives, a new reward type could be bottles or cooked meal slots. I'm not the first person to say this, but making it so that you can upgrade the number of meals you can carry by doing quests would make quests more rewarding and would also make food a bit less game-breaking. Fusing materials to weapons will now work like fusing weapons to other weapons, where the material breaks once its durability is used up. This would make the base weapons last a lot longer, as the durability would effectively be reset every time you attach a new part to it. This would be especially useful for mining. You could just keep fusing rocks to the same stick and clear out a whole cave. There would also ideally be a much wider variety of enemy types. If you're not willing to design new, unique enemies, at least bring back some of the old ones. Some of my picks would be Armos, Darknuts, Tektites, Levers, Peahats, Dodongos, and Dekubabas, but that's by no means an exhaustive list. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on is, in my mind, the obvious answer. If they wanted to make Tears of the Kingdom, but have it actually work, there is a solution that is staring them directly in the face. Send Link to the past with Zelda. Want to reuse the world from Breath of the Wild without it feeling stale? Show us this world as it appeared thousands of years ago. Why is there no Sheikah stuff in this world? Because it hasn't been invented yet. Why is the terrain different? Because it's thousands and thousands of years in the past. And that's not me talking out of my ass. If you look in the memories, you can see that the dueling peaks are still one mountain. You could even take this to the extreme. Have the Leviathan skeletons be alive in the past. This setup allows you to introduce as many new characters as you want, redesign the game world as much or as little as you want, give us a sense of what this world was like in the past, and with this setup, the continuity between the games doesn't really matter. It would still matter to me. I know as a Breath of the Wild enjoyer, I would be disappointed to not get any follow-up from Breath of the Wild, but we didn't get that anyway. At least let me explore ancient Hyrule. Let me meet the ancient sages. Let me see what society was like in the past. That is an infinitely more compelling choice, and it's right there staring us all in the face. I'm sure I could write a few thousand more words about things I would do differently if I wanted to, but I think you get the idea. If you really want to see my full reimagining of this game for some reason, you can let me know in the comments. But for now, the end's in sight, so let's finally get this video wrapped up. So, in conclusion, I think Tears of the Kingdom sucks. The obvious question then is why I spent literally hundreds of hours making this video, and we'll get to that, but first I want to respond to a criticism that I'm sure a lot of people will have for this video as a whole. My issues with Tears of the Kingdom stem almost entirely from what it isn't. The missed opportunities, the gaps in the storytelling, the failure to iterate on the vision that was roughly sketched out by Breath of the Wild, all of this is refusing to look at the game as its own unique work of art. In order to judge it fairly, some might argue, I'd need to take a step back from my own biases and appreciate the game for what it is. This is an argument that I'm intimately familiar with because it's one that I make all the time about Breath of the Wild. Plenty of people were disappointed by the lack of compelling rewards, the short and overly simplistic dungeons, the hands-off approach to the story, the final boss, and the list goes on and on. I agree with most of the criticism Breath of the Wild has received, but that's never stopped me from loving the game. And if that's how you feel about Tears of the Kingdom, then more power to you. I genuinely understand where you're coming from. The difference to me, though, is that Breath of the Wild was Nintendo's first attempt at an open-world Zelda concept. Comparing it to previous entries in the series wasn't productive, since Breath of the Wild set out with a different set of goals from its predecessors. It was determined to break away from the things that had defined the series really since A Link to the Past. But then you have Tears of the Kingdom, a direct sequel set in the same exact world, with the same map, same pre-established cast of characters, same gameplay loop. The foundation was all there already. I've heard people compare Tears of the Kingdom to Super Mario Galaxy 2, and on the surface it's a comparison I agree with. Both are basically just more of their predecessor, running on the same engine with a somewhat expanded scope. The difference is that Mario Galaxy 2 took 2.5 years to make, was almost entirely new content, and retailed for the same price as the first game. Mario games also place significantly less focus on their story than Zelda games do, and Galaxy 1 effectively future-proofed itself by ending with the universe basically resetting, and Rosalina outright stating that time is cyclical in this world, and the cycle never repeats itself the same way. So not only is the lack of story continuity less important in Galaxy 2 than it is in Tears, it's also justified in-game. Tears of the Kingdom took 6 years to make, recycled a huge portion of its content, and is the most expensive Switch game to date. I know I've brought up this point about the game taking 6 years to come out over and over and over again, but seriously, what were they doing that took them so long? The most common answer to that question that I've heard is that they spent those 6 years developing and polishing the physics engine, but I'm not compelled by that answer. Like, at all. My issue with that explanation doesn't stem from some sense that they should have been able to figure the physics out faster. Again, I'm not a programmer. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to develop, test, and refine this engine. An engine that, by the way, works very well. It makes a lot of intuitive sense. When you think you can do something, you probably can. But there's more to a dev team than just the programmers. And ultimately, I can't help but feel like this physics engine is wasted on Tears of the Kingdom, because the game never asks you to do anything interesting with it. The puzzles are so simple, the dungeons are so short, the story is so lazily written, so repetitive and full of holes, and things that don't make sense not because they're mysterious, but because no one thought them through. And most of these issues have nothing to do with the physics engine that was apparently so important that it was prioritized at the cost of literally everything else. Orion said it best when he said that it's like the world's most delicious frosting on a piece of cardboard. My point is that it took them 6 years to make this game because physics engine just isn't a good excuse. What's probably a better excuse is the pandemic. If the game missed out on some crucial development because of COVID, first of all, same, but second of all, if the game isn't finished, delay it. I would have been happy to wait another year for a Tears of the Kingdom that felt finished. After all, as the saying goes, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. Nintendo has a market cap of $63 billion. They had the time, resources, talent, and experience to blow Breath of the Wild out of the water, and what we got feels like a second draft at best and a tech demo at worst. I can't just love Tears of the Kingdom for what it is, because without Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom is nothing, and Tears of the Kingdom didn't fix a single one of Breath of the Wild's biggest problems. But The game can be a lot of fun. Flurry Rush is broken, but it's still satisfying to pull off. The shrines are mostly terrible, but the Proving Grounds are a great addition. You don't need to use the air bike for everything. You can steal this big cube out of a shrine, use auto build to make an even bigger cube, and drop it on a mini-boss. It might not even kill it, but it's still fun to try something silly just to see if it'll work, especially if you can be nearly sure that it will. You get out what you put into Tears of the Kingdom, and while I maintain that it shouldn't be the player's job to make a game fun, it clearly worked for a lot of people. It worked for me when I had surgery and was stuck in bed for several weeks while I recovered. It's also given me an excuse to spend time with my mom. Getting to watch her play this game and be genuinely delighted by it has been such a treat, and despite everything, I know I'll be sad when she's finished with it.
Check. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to go and get that treasure chest, which may result in my doom. And also, I might go through a lot of trouble to get to that treasure chest only to discover that it is something very lame.
That's a very real possibility.
Ooh, I have gone down to my doom, as predicted. If that ball is not right where I left it, I'm going to cry.
It's a good thing that worked out, because it shouldn't have.
That was kind of miraculous. No, it's lame. Oh no.
But loving the time I spend playing Tears of the Kingdom with my mom is not loving Tears of the Kingdom. It's loving my mom. Choosing to think outside the box when you could just play the game the quote-unquote intended way isn't a decision born out of some great game design. It comes from your own intrinsic creativity. Speedrunning this game takes ingenuity, discipline, and a whole lot of skill, but that's not because Tears of the Kingdom was set up with speedrunners in mind. If anything, patching out the most useful glitches and making a 5-minute unskippable intro cutscene has kneecapped a lot of people's interest in speedrunning this game. But people are still gonna do it because people are crazy, and also awesome. If you got super attached to these characters and to this world, I'm happy for you. But the things we love about Tears of the Kingdom don't come from the game, they come from us. It's what we bring to this game that makes it special. It's okay to enjoy it. Of course it's okay to enjoy it. I would never argue otherwise. But just because you enjoyed a game doesn't mean that the game is good. And it also doesn't mean that we can't demand better, especially when these games mean so much to the people who play them. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I spent so much time thinking about this game, playing this game, analyzing this game, even though I was so disappointed by it, because I care. Because deep disappointment is the direct result of hope. I want to see this series at its best. And for all that I hate about Tears of the Kingdom, it's still a Zelda game. And I love Zelda games. I've always loved Zelda games. So I guess I'm part of the problem. But isn't that kind of what life's all about? Even when things are shitty or disappointing, frustrating, or meaningless, we go on living. We keep playing, analyzing, understanding, and even having fun. And that's why so many people loved Tears of the Kingdom. Because the most important part of the game, the thing that brings life to this dead, recycled, exhausted world, is the person playing it. The game still sucks, though. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm legally obligated to tell you to like, comment, and subscribe, but honestly, I'm just thankful that you managed to sit through this whole thing. Congratulations! You listened to hours and hours of deranged ramblings, because hell hath no fury like a Zelda fan scorned. I'm sure there's something that I didn't mention that I'll remember as soon as I hit upload. I have come to peace with that. It's going to be okay. I'm so thankful to the people who encouraged and supported me throughout the process of making this video, especially the long list of people who had to listen to me foaming at the mouth rambling about this game for the past year. Sorry, and also thank you, and I hope it was worth it. This video was my first attempt at ever making a long-form video essay like this, or really making long-form content in general, and it took me almost a year to make, so if you're wondering when my next video is coming out, I have no idea. But there will be a next video, so stay tuned, and thank you again for watching. Secret Stone? Demon King?